Chapter 1922. The Eternal Prosperity Celestial King looked towards the sky and revealed a look of slight surprise. Not to mention that his divine sense was boundless. Even if he casually glanced at it now, he could immediately discover what was going on. Fifth Severance, Natural Peach Seal. These two were always connected. He had never heard of anyone that could survive the heavenly tribulation of the fifth severance without relying on the natural peach seal. There was definitely no such person. Even those few old monsters had not been so ferocious in the past. Their heirs did not have any other treasures that they could rely on to withstand this kind of great tribulation either. He could only rely on the natural peach talisman. Which brat is this from? He actually has such a treasure? He was a little curious. The natural peach tree was the source of heaven and earth, but it had been cut down by an unparalleled existence many years ago. The natural peach talismans that everyone used now were all passed down a long time ago, and there were no new ones left. This was something that could only be used once. For it to be able to arrive at this moment, it made the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King slightly interested. Moreover, what about the fifth severance? Even among the disciples of ninth heaven celestial kings, there weren't many that could reach this kind of height. Every great sect would only produce one or two in a single epoch. But now, there were actually two people breaking through at the same time. Even he, an eighth heaven celestial king, could not conceal his astonishment. Lu Herong also revealed an expression of surprise. Though her abilities were inferior to the Eternal Prosperity Celestial Kings, the Rock Palace was a ninth heaven celestial king tier force, and she actually knew more than the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King. The Kunping Palace did not have many connate peach talismans left. Interesting. Truly interesting. The Eternal Prosperity Celestial King's eyes shone brightly, and the look of astonishment on his face deepened. He had not paid any attention to Ling Han before. It was only when he was attracted by the heavenly tribulation that he took a second look. Then, he discovered the natural peach talisman. Following that, he discovered even more things. If the immortal king wanted to know, there was no way to hide it. Heaven and earth ancestral flame, source water. The Eternal Prosperity Celestial King murmured. Even a celestial king would find it extremely difficult to obtain one of these two source powers, yet he has obtained two of them. Could it be that he is? Lu Hairong's beautiful eyes also shone. With the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King's reminder, how could she not come out? It's amazing. She instantly felt a strong urge to capture Ling Han, seize the two source powers of heaven and earth, and hand them over to Hun Yo to refine. As soon as this thought appeared, it became uncontrollable. This kid is called Ling Han, the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King said with a laugh. Lu Herong opened her mouth and didn't know what to say. Was this Ling Han the Ling Han Hun Yo was looking for? This is too much of a coincidence. Hun Yo firmly believed that Ling Han had not died. If this young man was that Ling Han, then being able to dodge the shockwaves of an ascending origin tier's attack was understandable. He even had two source energies of the heavens and earth. Could it be that he didn't have other defensive treasures? Unfortunately, in that case, he would not be able to transfer the two source powers of heaven and earth to Hun Yo. Xiao, a figure flew over. It was a white-haired old man with sparse hair, a stooped figure, and a face full of wrinkles. He looked like he was about to die of old age, and his entire body emitted a strong aura of decay. Old demon blood shadow, brat, did you think that I wouldn't be able to catch up to you just because you ran out quietly? How naive. He sneered, but he didn't notice the presence of the two celestial kings. As long as the immortal king didn't want others to know, it didn't matter who he was standing in front of. In terms of grasp of great Tao, celestial kings surpassed the ascending origin tier by more than just a little bit. Brat, do you think I won't be able to find you? Old demon blood shadow murmured to himself. Previously, he had been waiting outside Alchemy City all along, and then discovered that Ling Han had become the new holy son of Alchemy City. To be honest, when he first heard this news, the expression on his face was incredibly interesting. He had told this brat to become Lu Xinming's follower and assist the latter to ascend the position. Then, he would take the chance to steal the natural peach seal, But this guy actually became the Holy Sun himself. This old demon blood shadow was very dumbfounded. This brat actually knew alchemy, and it seemed like his attainments were not low either. Otherwise, how could he possibly have been chosen as the Holy Sun of Alchemy City? He immediately recalled that he had previously discovered that there was something strange on Ling Han's body, and it was very likely that he was hiding some kind of treasure. But at that time, he had only considered the natural peach seal. Otherwise, if he could not break through to the next cultivation level, it would be useless no matter how many treasures he had. In any case, he would smack Ling Han to death in future, and whatever treasure he had would be his. But now, a wave of regret rose up in him. He had a feeling that he seemed to have made a mistake. After that, when Ling Han ascended the position and became the future chairperson of Alchemy City, old Demon Blood Shadow was directly dumbfounded. That was fine too. Told you to be someone else's assistant and help him ascend the position, yet you took it yourself. Bull. This kind of change in plan, even if someone else had thought of it, how could they possibly do it? After old Demon Blood Shadow's shock, what remained was naturally wild joy. Now, his natural peach seal would be secured, and the treasures on Ling Han would also be his. But he waited, and still did not see Ling Han come out to see him, which made the old bastard more and more anxious. In the end, he could not help but sneak into the city, and was even discovered. A great battle ensued and he fled, wounded. But he still managed to capture a few people, and directly extracted their souls. He discovered that Ling Han had already left Alchemy City, and had gone to meet Yen Xianlu. Thus he too immediately hurried over. Though the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King was famous, he felt that as long as he did not provoke this Celestial King, and merely abducted a minor cultivator or minor alchemist, there was definitely no way that it could possibly alert the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King. Could it be that this Celestial King was acquainted with Ling Han? What a joke! He could not ascend Three Yang Peak. This was the place where a Celestial King attained Tao. Now, the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King only allowed juniors in the Severing Mundane tier to go and fight for this kind of great fortune. It was completely impossible for others to break through his means, unless their strength was still above his. But if their strength was still above his, what use would they have for this kind of great fortune? Lightning flashed, and a large man also quietly appeared. Ba Yaohe returned to the Thundercloud Palace, and repeated the matter regarding Ling Han. Then he found an excuse, and ran out alone. Of course, it was for Ling Han. Born of a Celestial King tier-level force, his judgment was much more brilliant than old Demon Blood Shadow's. He could be sure that the treasure on Ling Han was priceless, and it was very likely to be a source power of heaven and earth, or a precious treasure of a Celestial King. Thus, he had come alone, wanting to seize this kind of treasure. Perhaps the opportunity for him to become a Celestial King was on Ling Han, the place where a Celestial King attained Tao. He looked up at Three Yang Peak, revealing an expression of awe. The Eternal Prosperity Celestial King was high and lofty, invulnerable to all tribulations. Compared to him, the Thundercloud Celestial King was as insignificant as an ant, not even worthy of carrying his shoes. He only dared to imagine that he could reach such heights in his dreams. It was normal. He only hoped that he could break through to become a Celestial King. When he was still a Holy Sun, he was filled with confidence, thinking that he would definitely succeed, but as his cultivation level increased, he gradually discovered that this kind of difficulty was as high as ascending to the heavens. Becoming a Celestial King was too difficult. How many holy sons and holy daughters had appeared in the Thundercloud Palace in these trillions of years, but how many had become Celestial Kings? 0. There was no lack of prodigies that were more outstanding than him, but everyone had failed, so why could he succeed? Whether I can become a Celestial King or not, it all depends on this one time. Chapter 1924. Ling Han had not expected at all that the great change that Small Tower spoke of would actually be so great. The 3 levels of the tower opened simultaneously. When the Tower of 3 Realms floated in his dantian, the 9 levels of the tower shone together, circulating with a supreme aura that could suppress the heavens and connect the ages. The eternal prosperity celestial king frowned slightly. Just then, he actually sensed a supreme aura that far surpassed his level. A ninth heaven celestial king perhaps, it was even stronger. How was this possible? His expression was filled with shock, and he only felt that it was inconceivable. It was as if all sorts of bizarre things had happened at the same time. Meanwhile, Lu Hairong's limbs trembled lightly. She had come into contact with this kind of aura before. Was it that lord? At the waist of the mountain, Ling Han did not have time to react to the changes in the Black Tower. He raised his fist skywards, and faced the heavenly tribulation that had become even more violent. In truth, he could have delivered this strike a little later. Then, even if the heaven and earth were enraged, another bolt of heavenly tribulation would descend at most, and he could even directly survive it. But Ling Han wanted to try and see just how terrifying this kind of heavenly tribulation was. He wanted to step onto the pinnacle of martial art, and had to surpass all prodigies. Thus, he also had to defeat some opponents that even prodigies could not possibly defeat. Furthermore, there was still the natural peach seal to suppress it. If he still could not survive this kind of heavenly tribulation, he would really be too useless. Peng He resisted the heavenly tribulation, and it was only a single exchange, and he felt his arm go slightly numb. This caused him to be slightly shocked. It should be known how powerful his physique was, and even Yin Soul elites would find it very difficult to wound him, but now he actually felt numb with a single strike. However, it felt great. A terrifying power surged through Ling Han's body. This was a mysterious change that had happened to his dantian after he had sliced open the heaven and earth. It no longer absorbed spiritual qi from the heaven and earth and converted it into origin power, but rather turned into a galaxy of its own. Previously, he had formed 10,000 stars, but that was only a symbol and could only store origin power, but it was different now. These stars had turned into real stars, and there was endless power that was nourishing him. No wonder the fifth severance was so strong, being able to match Yang Soul elites. This was a completely new cultivation level. He can break through the dome of heaven. Ling Han let out a long howl as he fought fiercely against the lightning. Punch after punch exploded, and the source power formed by the nine heavens flame and the Xianyin source water coiled around his fists, forming symbols of the Great Path. They also grew stronger in this process. The source energy of the heaven and earth was destined to reach the celestial king realm, but whether it could reach the first, second, eighth, or ninth heaven was uncertain. Therefore, Ling Han had to constantly temper them. On the other side, the Empress's heavenly tribulation was also nearing its end. She did what she could, and did not deliver the fifth strike too early. Instead, she waited until the last bolt of heavenly tribulation descended before delivering the fifth strike. In this way, even though the heavens and earth were enraged, they could do nothing to her. Since the two of them were undergoing heavenly tribulation at the same time, the Empress's heavenly tribulation was over, and Ling Han's was naturally over as well. The two masses of thunderclouds dissipated at practically the same time. Ling Han and the Empress exchanged a look, and both of them broke into a satisfied smile. Fifth severance. From this moment onwards, they had finally advanced into the ranks of top-tier prodigies, and would not be monopolized by Yan Xianlu, Shan Jitong, and the others. Brat, don't be complacent. Even among the fifth severance, there is still a difference in strength, Small Tower warned. Ling Han nodded. Just take Yan Xianlu, Shan Jitong, and Lao Song as an example. It was clear that Yan Xianlu was stronger, and perhaps not just by a little bit. Shan Jitong and Lao Song had to join forces to be able to stand against him. Achieving the fifth severance was only stepping over the threshold. How far one could go would still depend on one's own efforts. It was not something that could be done once and for all. Cultivation was always like rowing a boat against the current. If one did not advance, they would fall behind. What about the Black Tower? The remaining 3 levels have all opened. What changes have occurred? Ling Han asked. We can use the acceleration of the flow of time, Small Tower said. The catalysis effect on celestial medicines is increased by 100-fold, and if it is limited to a small area, it can reach 1,000-fold. Ling Han was first startled, then overjoyed and said, in other words, if I concoct alchemical pills in the Black Tower, I can increase the speed by 1,000-fold? Yes. Small Tower nodded. Ling Han couldn't help but smile. In terms of comprehension, it was still better under the reincarnation tree, but that was only the acceleration of his mental state. If he added the physical body into it, then the acceleration effect of the Black Tower would definitely be even more awesome. Additionally, you can also comprehend the regulations of time, space, and slaughter, Small Tower continued. Too awesome. This time, the Tower of Three Realms could be considered to have unleashed its full might. Additionally, you can also draw on the power of the Black Tower to a limited extent and release the power of time, space, and slaughter. You can slowly ponder over this, Small Tower said. All right, don't bother me now. I also want to improve myself and adapt to my new ability. This proud tower was clearly the one that was babbling on and actually turned around to talk about him. However, it was fine as long as he knew, so there was no need to pay it any mind. Ling Han smiled at the Empress and said, "Let's go." Though they had spent an extra 10 days, it was not necessarily impossible for them to contend for first place, because they had already traveled for 10 months and had not reached the summit, which showed how tall this mountain was. Wasting 10 days would indeed have an effect, but it would not be too great. For example, not a single person had caught up to them now, and this was clear proof. Of course, it was also possible that others had not taken this path, and this was not the only path that led to the summit. The two of them held hands and walked side by side. Clouds and mist swirled, and immediately, a new memory manifestation of a celestial king appeared, but this time, it was at the level of Yang Soul. True enough, the heaven and earth resonated and would adjust according to the difference in cultivation level of each person. Thus, a higher cultivation level did not have any advantage, but rather battle strength at the same cultivation level determined the speed of advancement. Come! Ling Han laughed loudly and was just about to try out the Black Tower's new ability. He could finally use the Black Tower to a limited extent, and this made him very curious exactly what level he could reach. The Tower of Three Realms was at least a 9th Heaven Celestial King tier level precious tool. If it was fully unleashed, it could rival a Celestial King now, so what if he could use it to a limited extent? Ling Han exchanged blows with a manifestation. He only parried, and did not retaliate, lest he accidentally kill the other. Then he communicated with the Black Tower, and found out how to use the mystical powers of time, space, and slaughter. With his comprehension ability, and added with the fact that the Black Tower was in his body in the first place, he very soon showed an expression of understanding, and pressed his palm towards a manifestation. Collect. That manifestation's whole body instantly lit up, and multiple patterns of great Tao appeared, but there was no change. I can't collect it. Ling Han was surprised. He had wanted to directly collect this manifestation into the Black Tower, but had failed. Then let's change. He smiled and pressed out another palm. Cut! Shwa shwa shwa. Innumerable wind blades sliced out, slashing towards that manifestation. Each wind blade was only a foot long, yet there were patterns of great Tao pulsating on them, drawing on the power of heaven and earth, strengthening them to a terrifying extent. The wind blades swept past, and that manifestation was immediately sliced into pieces. And it was done just like that. Chapter 1925. Powerful Ling Han himself could deal with this manifestation, but it definitely would not be so easy. The Tower of Three Realms was truly a precious treasure. This was only a limited use, and it was still limited by his cultivation level, yet its might was already so terrifying, so how powerful would it be in future? But why couldn't he collect it previously? Ling Han thought for a moment, and realization dawned on him. After drawing it into the Black Tower, it would really be within his complete control. Then, the might that the Black Tower could unleash had to be a few times stronger than the opponent's, and only then could it be drawn in. The Black Tower was naturally stronger than that manifestation, but the might that it could unleash now could not reach a few times stronger. The Empress spent some effort to kill that manifestation. Firstly, her battle prowess was inferior to Ling Han's, and secondly, she did not use the power of her divine fetus, and thirdly, she did not have the Black Tower either. Thus, her speed was slightly slower. Next, her opponent appeared again. Time flows. Ling Han used the regulations of time and pressed out a palm strike. That manifestation directly dissipated. It was not shattered by a terrifying power, but rather the endless acceleration of time that was manifested in his palm strike, directly catalyzing it to the point where it died of old age and dissipated. Of course, if the opponent had been a normal person, then the effect would definitely not be so good. Because Celestials had unlimited lifespans, so what if the flow of time accelerated their aging? It was only their attacks that were affected. But these manifestations were different. They were formed from the power of heaven and earth, and definitely could not exist for too long a period of time. Thus, under the acceleration of time, they rapidly disintegrated. Next, Ling Han tried out the regulations of slaughter. His sword streaked past, and murderous aura soared into the skies, instantly tearing this manifestation into pieces. The power of 3 regulations was astonishingly powerful. After testing it out, Ling Han had a good idea, and did not waste any more time. When the manifestation appeared, he directly moved, sweeping through everything in his path. His speed was much faster than before. Previously, he and the Empress were only Emperor tiers, and though the strength of the manifestations was much weaker, the crushing power of a monarch tier over those of the same cultivation level was completely different from that of an Emperor tier. Ling Han was the main attacker, and the Empress practically did not need to move. Their speed suddenly soared, and they headed towards the top of the mountain. In the blink of an eye, another few days had passed. Yan Xianlu was filled with lofty ambitions. The peak of the mountain was already close at hand, and he could be sure that this great fortune of heaven and earth had not been taken away by anyone yet. As expected, he was destined to become a king. A peerless prodigy. He strode forward, and the clouds scattered. There was a large stone in front of him that was about 3 meters in diameter. Its surface was flat, and there were runes flashing on it, as if they were alive. This was the boulder that the eternal prosperity celestial king had sat on when he was comprehending the Tao. After an epoch had passed, not only had the traces of the great Tao not faded, but instead, under the blessing of the heaven and earth, it had undergone a special transformation. Not every celestial king would be able to trigger the resonance of the heavens and earth when they achieved the Tao and leave behind such a precious treasure. Only super mighty people at the level of the eternal prosperity celestial king could do it. What he needed to do now was to sit on the boulder. When a celestial king achieved the Tao, the heaven and earth would shine. This boulder had left behind a tiny bit of celestial king source power, but after an epoch of evolution, this source power had become a supreme rare treasure that could improve a cultivator in all aspects. In fact, this was about the same as the celestial king flame that the heavenly fire celestial king had transformed into Tao. However, the heavenly fire celestial king was more decisive, and had even refined himself, unlike the eternal prosperity celestial king, who had only left behind a tiny bit of benefit. Thus, this was far from being able to compare with the core of the heavenly fire celestial king, but with the blessing of the heaven and earth for an epoch, it was still a precious treasure among precious treasures. Near. Even Yan Xianlu showed an expression of excitement. As long as he sat on that boulder, the accumulation of the heaven and earth for an epoch would surge into his body, giving him endless fortune. It was very possible that he would be able to catch up to those world-defying freaks. His footsteps involuntarily quickened slightly. That was because of the excitement in his heart. It was as if the boulder had a life of its own because there were a sufficient number of prodigies here, and the battles were also sufficiently intense. That was why it had caused the heaven and earth to resonate with the celestial king achieving Tao stone, forming some kind of special transformation. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. His footsteps became more and more hurried, and he was already very close to that celestial boulder. All of a sudden, a strong sense of danger welled up in his heart. He suddenly raised his hand, and a white seal of light surged out from his palm. Then it enlarged, and an earthy yellow-black tortoise appeared. An attack shot over, blasting onto the seal of light. Suddenly, even the void trembled, as if the space was about to be torn apart. Shan Jitong, Yan Xianlu said calmly, not even turning his head. Are you regretting your decision? You should not have invited me here. Shan Jitong walked over from afar, his expression calm as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. Yen Xianlu smiled calmly, but he was not looking at Shan Jitong. Instead, he was staring at another corner and said, "Brother Lao, why are you still not coming out? How long do you plan to hide for?" Shan Jitong's expression immediately changed because he had not discovered that Lao Song was still standing guard in secret. If he had battled fiercely with Yen Xianlu just now, then it was very possible that the latter would take advantage of the opportunity to snatch away his great fortune. The problem was this. He had not discovered Lao Song, but Yen Xianlu had. At least in terms of perception, the gap between the two of them was really a little big. Of course, it was also possible that Yen Xianlu was deliberately acting mysterious, wanting to disturb his Dao heart. Hee, Brother Yen indeed has sharp eyes and ears. My snake breath celestial technique is confident that it can deceive even dividing soul tier, yet Brother Yen has seen through it with a single glance. Amidst a light chuckle, Lao Song walked out. Shan Jitong's originally troubled expression involuntarily darkened even further. True enough, Yen Xianlu's perception was above his own. Yen Xianlu smiled calmly and said, "I have not discovered Brother Lao's existence. I merely thought that since Brother Shan has appeared, then Brother Lao should also be nearby." Fuck, he was actually bluffing. Shan Jitong suddenly felt like throwing up blood. He had not thought that a prodigy like Yen Xianlu would actually resort to trickery. If Lao Song really was not here, then wouldn't it be a great embarrassment? Lao Song's initially smiling face involuntarily became very awkward. He stared at Yen Xianlu, and suddenly broke into a smile. There was actually a strong sense of charm, and he said, "As expected of Brother Yen, intelligence and strength are both top-notch in the world." Yen Xianlu only smiled. Only he himself knew that he had indeed sensed Lao Song's existence. Because he was a celestial Dao physique, and was compatible with great Dao, then, with another person by his side, how could he possibly not sense it? There was no need to say this. For some abilities, it was enough that he only needed to know. "The great fortune is right in front of you, and it belongs to the strong," he said, and his whole aura suddenly changed. At first, he was like a supreme divine sword, but with a sheath, its edge was not obvious. But now that the divine sword was unsheathed, it exuded an astonishing light. "The two of you come at me together," he said to Lao Song and Shan Jitong, his tone calm as if he was only saying something that could not be any more ordinary. Reading on a cell phone was more refreshing. Chapter 1926. Yen Xianlu, you are too arrogant. Shan Jitong showed an expression of fury. Though Yen Xianlu was indeed famous, having the title of the first severing mundane tier, they were both monarch tiers, so how could the gap be so great that two people had to join forces to be a match? He was arrogant to the point of being arrogant. Yen Xianlu stood with his hands clasped behind his back and calmly said, "Whether I am arrogant or not, won't we know after we make our move?" "Brother Yen, how bold!" Lao Song said smilingly. His smile was very charming, but his face really gave off the feeling that it was a woman in disguise. He raised his hand, and his thumb and middle finger curled up slightly. "However, Brother Yen, don't seek trouble for yourself." Shan Jitong did not object. His reputation no longer needed to be supported by defeating anyone. Thus, so what if he joined forces with Lao Song to battle Yen Xianlu? Would anyone dare question his talent? He was merely teaching a person whose confidence had soared to the skies a lesson. "Then, Yen Xianlu, come battle." Shan Jitong moved first. Xiao, he turned into a flash of black light, and appeared in front of Yen Xianlu with a flash. Then he shot out a punch. Though this was only a punch, it stirred up the great aura of the heaven and earth. It was as if there was only this fist left in the whole world, and it pressed down on Yen Xianlu. Lao Song also moved. He pushed out an arm, and turned into a silver snake. It clearly had fangs, but it did not give off the slightest feeling of malevolence. Instead, it exuded a divine might. The silver snake moved, and actually reached first despite moving later, wrapping around Yen Xianlu. Pa! The snake's body coiled around Yen Xianlu's body, and suddenly wrapped around him, wanting to forcefully crush him into pieces. Brother Yen, you underestimate your opponent too much. Lao Song's charming eyes flickered with fury, because Yen Xianlu did not retaliate at all, allowing the silver snake to wrap around his body, showing strong contempt. Yen Xianlu only smiled. When Shan Jitong's fist blasted over, he stretched out a hand calmly, struggled free from the snake's body, and threw out a punch. Boom! A shock wave spread out, surging out in all directions, and then another wave and another wave. At least 100 shock waves spread out in the surroundings in the form of blazing light, a spectacular sight. Both Shan Jitong and Lao Song's expressions changed. Shan Jitong was stunned. It was Yen Xianlu who had blocked his attack with a casual punch. Furthermore, it was he who had suffered a slight disadvantage, and had been sent flying. Though he had not been injured, the difference in battle prowess could not be any more obvious. And Lao Song clearly knew how terrifying a silver snake entangling one's body was, but just now, Yen Xianlu had easily broken free. It was as if that was not the apparition of the source snake, but a rope that had not been tied tightly. However, the expressions on their faces became much more unsightly. That was because Yen Xianlu was facing off against the two of them at the same time. Even when facing the two of them alone, it was still so easy, and he even had the upper hand. How could they accept this? They are emperors. Emperors, overlooking the 9 heavens, looking down on the mortal world, high and mighty, how could they be defeated? You guys should go out more. Yen Xianlu said calmly. The world is vast, and prodigies are as common as clouds. You all are working behind closed doors, thinking that you are invincible among your peers just because you have become a monarch tier. Emperors also have their own differences. When he said the last sentence, he shone with boundless radiance. That sharpness and divine might couldn't be concealed at all. He, Yen Xianlu, the king of the celestial path, was the true monarch tier. Shan Jitong and Lao Song were both stunned. Though they had only exchanged a single move, though they still had astonishing ultimate moves that they had not used, when one had reached their level, it would be obvious who was stronger the moment they exchanged blows. Yen Xianlu was indeed the strongest among the younger generation of the Eastern Celestial Realm. To say nothing of strength, just this domineering air in front of them was something that they could not compare to, causing them to actually feel an urge to submit to him and follow him in conquering the world. They were greatly shocked. How could a mighty monarch tier follow another? However, they could not suppress this urge no matter what. Ling Han. Ling Han. Just at this moment, they heard a voice travel out from below. Though it was very hurried, it was unspeakably pleasant to the ears. Yen Xianlu was surprised. He naturally knew who Ling Han was, but who was this woman? There was great doubt here, so he could not use the full extent of his vision, and could only see a blurry figure. However, this figure immediately became clear. Suddenly, an astonishingly beautiful young girl pounced into his eyes. Really beautiful and pure and innocent. How could there be such a beautiful, such pure girl? Even with Yen Xianlu's Dao heart, he shuddered slightly and then immediately came back to his senses. Before reaching the 9th heaven celestial king tier, he would not consider anything other than martial art. He definitely had not invited this girl. Though there were many people who had come this time, every single one of them had been carefully selected by Yen Xianlu. There was definitely no one who had come just to make up the numbers. And with his memory, he naturally remembered clearly who he had invited, and what they looked like. Moreover, he had not seen this young girl at the foot of the mountain. So fast. He was immediately stunned. The young girl had definitely set off later than them, but she was actually only a little later than him. This strength was really impressive. Strange, with such a prodigy appearing, how could he possibly not know? Shan Jitong and Lao Song also had the same thought. Being able to arrive only a little later than them, this strength was really astonishing. And though the Eastern Celestial Realm was astonishingly large, they could not possibly travel all over and know all the prodigies, but there should only be a few outstanding people. Yen Xianlu and the others had not even processed this thought when intense shock appeared on their faces. That was because the young girl was not alone. She had also brought with her an army of celestial king memory manifestations. An army What kind of concept was that? Only when their numbers reached a certain extent could they be called an army, and behind the young girl, the number of manifestations was at least in the hundreds. Like wild horses, they surged past in waves, from the hundreds to the thousands, and then over 10,000. Heavens! Even a supreme prodigy like Yen Xianlu almost exclaimed in shock. Who exactly was this young girl that she had actually provoked so many manifestations? More importantly, she was actually still in the lead all the way, and was not harmed at all. Otherwise, she would have long since been intercepted, and drowned out by these manifestations. Her ability to flee was really impressive, and she was also extremely daring, actually daring to draw out so many manifestations. Was she not afraid of being overturned? Ahead, clouds and mist swirled, forming a human figure. Then, it shot towards the young girl, but it had just charged over when it was sent flying by a punch and a kick from the young girl. This is so strong. The expressions of Yen Xianlu and the others were grave. To be able to lead such an army of manifestations in a charge, that was only because the young girl's speed was fast enough. But that punch just now had fully displayed her strength. A simple punch, plain and unadorned, yet it had returned to simplicity, concentrating great Tao into the fist. I am Tao, who can stop me? Get out of the way, get out of the way. The young girl charged straight over, her expression filled with impatience. Whoever does not get out of the way, Niu will send him flying. Chapter 1928. Miss, I would like to seek guidance from you. Yen Xianlu's fighting spirit blazed like fire. Niu was indeed very strong, and was even more powerful than him, but the path of a monarch tier was to defeat opponents that were impossible to defeat along the way, and finally reach the pinnacle. He knew that there was a gap between him and these heaven-defying monsters. This stone of immortal enlightenment was his chance to make up for this gap. Therefore, how could he just give it up? Snatching Niu's things, and you still want to fight with Niu. When Niu became unreasonable, she was also extremely tragic. She glared fiercely at Yen Xianlu, and stretched out a finger. Niu is going to beat you up. She was the first to rush out. Hong, two wings appeared on her back, completely formed from great Tao symbols, releasing an ancient and noble aura. Ancestral rock. Shan Jitong and Lao Song exclaimed at the same time. As it turned out, this young girl was the heir of the Origin Rocks line. Among the primordial ancestors, the Origin Rock could definitely be considered a first-rate one. No wonder the young girl's speed was so fast. Otherwise, if it had been another fifth severance, they would have long since been caught by those manifestations. Shua, with a flap of her wings, Niu had already appeared in front of Yen Xianlu, and shot out a punch. There's no logic, no logic. I'll just blow you up with one punch. Yen Xianlu showed a sliver of irritation. He was a supreme prodigy, a divine fetus that was born on the celestial path. It was suspected that he had been nurtured by heaven and earth. Within the same cultivation level, no one could humiliate him. He clearly knew that Niu's strength was ferocious, and it was not advisable for him to face her head-on, but Niu directly and domineeringly charged over. If he still did not dare to face her head-on, then he would really lose face. A person could be defeated, but his heart could not be defeated. This was the dignity of a monarch. Niu, however, did not care in the slightest. When her fist landed, another great Tao symbol lit up. There was only one, and it was still incomplete, forming the image of a large fish. Even though it was badly damaged, this symbol was too terrifying. It was as if the heavens themselves were being crushed, and the earth was trembling. Strange phenomena appeared in the world. This is too terrifying. No, it's not Zhu Peng. Lao Song gulped. Kunpeng Shan Jitong followed up. His eyes were also wide open, his shock indescribable. When the world first came into being, the first batch of living beings all became immortal kings. They were called source beasts. Some source beasts had died in the endless passage of time, while others had ascended to a higher level. Hence, source beasts were divided into various ranks. The Origin Rock was a first-rate beast, but above that was the King Beast. For example, the Origin Dragon, Origin Phoenix, and Kuan-Peng were all at the king tier. According to legend, there were more than 20 types of king-level source beasts. However, there were only about 10 of them left in the world. Every single one of them had an earth-shattering character. Ninth Heaven Immortal King. There were 9 heavens in the Celestial King tier, and each step was like reaching the heavens. In front of a 9th Heaven Celestial King, even an 8th Heaven Celestial King would be a junior. This kind of crushing pressure was like a dividing soul tier to a severing mundane tier. Thus, though Yen Xianlu was the heir of an 8th Heaven Celestial King, he paled in comparison to her, and they did not have the right to compare with Hunyao at all. They were merely the heirs of 6th or 7th Heaven Celestial Kings, and they were who knew how many times weaker. Bam Hunyao and Yen Xianlu exchanged a blow. This was a clash of great Tao and regulations. 2 completely different great Tao and regulations shook, forming a frightening shockwave. Then, Yen Xianlu was sent flying backwards. This time, he was not sent flying, but he was not much better off. He retreated for over 300 meters before finally coming to a halt. The Kuan-Peng soared above the 9 heavens, incredibly agile. It patrolled the skies, tyrannical and fierce beyond compare. This was a source beast that possessed both extreme power and speed. Otherwise, how could it possibly rank as a king beast? Extreme power, Yen Xianlu said slowly. There was not the slightest hint of dispiritedness in his eyes, only an even higher fighting spirit. He had been forced back not because his battle prowess was inferior, but because the regulations that the latter cultivated represented the extreme of power. There were very few source beasts that could match the Kuan-Peng in strength. The origin dragon was one, and then what about the others? However, power was only a part of battle prowess. He had a celestial Tao physique, so he would not lose. Again, he roared. The power of his divine fetus was completely activated, and it was as if he had transformed into great Tao. In this battle of heaven and earth, he had the absolute initiative. That was because he was practically the great Tao of heaven and earth. Any movement that his opponent made could not be hidden from him, and he himself could also merge with great Tao, so how could you wound me? Could you wound the great Tao of heaven and earth? If you couldn't, then how could you wound me? Hunyao's ferocious nature was hard to suppress in the first place, and being provoked like this, she immediately pounced over. She still threw a punch, and it was still an incomplete seal, yet it could suppress the heaven and earth, and could be considered invincible. Yen Xianlu was instantly struck, and was sent flying like a shooting star. That was right, he had a celestial Tao physique, and when the power of his divine fetus was activated, he was practically one with the great Tao of heaven and earth. The moment you moved, he would know, and then he could easily dodge, even merging with great Tao, so how could you wound me? But Hunyao's speed was too fast, so fast that it surpassed Yen Xianlu's reaction time. If you wanted to sense great Tao, you would need time, right? Once this information was transmitted, you would be able to react, but Hunyao's speed surpassed this transmission time. Thus, when Yen Xianlu had just sensed which angle Hunyao was going to attack from, he had already been struck by a punch, and had absolutely no time to dodge or merge with great Tao. The pinnacle level of speed. The reason why the rock could become a king-level source beast was because it did not possess the pinnacle of just one kind of regulation. Too lousy, so boring. Hunyao clapped her hands, and then turned towards Shan Jitong and Yen Xianlu, a ferocious glint appearing in her eyes again. Shan Jitong and Yen Xianlu hurriedly shook their heads. Even Yen Xianlu had been sent flying so easily, so they naturally were even less of a match for her. It was better not to provoke Hunyao. You two are too weak, so it's even more boring, Hunyao said, and walked towards the Celestial King achieving Tao Stone. Shan Jitong and Yen Xianlu both wanted to vomit blood. Though they were indeed a little weak, they were monarch tiers, after all, and had their own dignity. Hunyao giggled as she walked to the side of the Celestial Stone, and stretched out her arms to hug the stone. She wanted to pull it out by force, and store it into a spatial god tool or something so that she could give it to Ling Han as a gift. So strange, why has something burrowed in? She was surprised. Oh no, why is the stone stuck to my hand? She cried out loudly, without the slightest bit of the restraint that a top-grade beauty should have. She was still that naughty and mischievous little girl from before. I can't shake this stupid rock off. Don't want it, it's really not a good thing. Hunyo tried her best to throw the celestial stone away, but it was as if this thing had taken root in her body, and she could not throw it away no matter how hard she tried. When they saw this, Yan Xianlu and the others felt like crying. You don't want it, but we do. But the celestial stone was already activated, and endless source power of heaven and earth entered Hunyo's body, improving her physique and pushing her closer to the great Tao. Hunyo stopped her meaningless struggle and allowed the celestial stone to do as it pleased. She wore a bitter expression, looking extremely disdainful. Fuck. Chapter 1929. The gloom in the hearts of Yan Xianlu and the others was really indescribable. But what could she do? The Celestial King achieving Tao Stone had already been taken away by Hunyo, and had also been used by her, so it was impossible for a second person to benefit from it. Where the hell did this girl pop out from? It was hard to imagine that a peerless beauty would have such a personality. The divine stone shone brighter and brighter, even surpassing the sun that the eternal Prosperity King had created in the sky. However, when it reached its peak, it only lasted for 10 breaths' time before the divine stone dimmed down, no longer having a hint of light. It was just like an ordinary stone. It was indeed an ordinary stone. All those years ago, the eternal Prosperity Celestial King had left behind a sliver of source power, and added with the blessing of heaven and earth for an epoch, all the benefits had entered Hunyo's body. Pa! The stone fell to the ground like an ordinary stone. Stinky rock, stinky rock. Hunyo was enraged, and stomped repeatedly with her foot. He actually dared to stick to her. She couldn't even shake him off. Damn it. However, my physique seems to have improved a little, she muttered to herself as she tilted her head. Just a little bit. Yan Xianlu and the others were all stunned. This was the Celestial King achieving Tao Stone, and with the blessing of the heaven and earth of an epoch, it could even turn a mortal fetus into a divine fetus. Even for them, it was of supreme benefit. But you've only improved by a tiny amount. If Hunyo wasn't lying, that meant that her physique was about to reach the pinnacle, and that was why there was practically no room for improvement in the Celestial Stone. But did Hunyo look like someone who would lie? Thus, Yan Xianlu and the others were all stunned. They also knew why Hunyo was so strong. Similarly at the fifth severance, the powerful physique indeed possessed an incredible advantage, especially with the rock bloodline. That was the strongest source beast in the world. Nyo will wait for Ling Han here. Hunyo found a large rock and sat down. She looked like a gentle, quiet, and beautiful girl. There was only tenderness and beauty in her, and there was no longer any trace of naughtiness. But a moment later, she kicked a stone out of boredom and lost her ladle-like image. When Hunyo took away the Celestial King achieving Tao Stone, the aura in the mountains suddenly became chaotic and then returned to calm. Although there was still a great deal of pressure, the clouds no longer took human form. Just like that, everyone's speed increased greatly. Come, the fortuitous encounter should have been taken away by someone, Ling Han said. This was a kind of intuition. The Empress nodded. That was what she was thinking as well. However, for the two of them, breaking through to the fifth severance was their greatest opportunity, surpassing everything else. Though they still felt that it was a bit of a pity, their gains had already far outweighed their regrets. Maybe it was Hunyo. Ling Han smiled. This girl was very energetic. Even if he and the Empress had not entered into the Black Tower to comprehend, Hunyo would still be able to catch up to them. Then, it would not be impossible for her to obtain the first place. The two of them maintained a constant speed as they adapted to the terrifying power they obtained after the breakthrough. From the fourth severance to the fifth severance, this leap was really too big. Originally, they would be able to quickly adapt by fighting with the manifestations, but as they fought, the manifestations would disappear. Thus, they were still a little lacking. Their speed was not fast, so the people behind them naturally caught up and overtook them one by one. Less than half a day later, Ling Han and the Empress arrived at the peak. Zhu Xuega jumped out, pointing at Ling Han. At first, he had wanted to start a battle with Ling Han, but in the end, there was a side issue, and he ended up fighting with someone else. At that time, he had been so engrossed in the battle that he had completely forgotten about the matter of Ling Han. Now that he was free, he naturally remembered it again. Some people would not let go of a grudge just because they were prodigies. What? Ling Han walked towards him, a faint smile curling up the corners of his lips. Previously, he had not been afraid of the other, and now that he had advanced into the fifth severance, he was confident that he could battle Yan Xianlu, so he would definitely not take the other as an opponent. Come fight. Zhu Xuega charged over with large strides. Ling Han. There was a delicate cry, and a beautiful figure charged over, but she was like a primordial beast, crushing everything in her path. Get lost, get lost. Hun Yo shouted loudly. What a... Zhu Xuega was just taking large strides, but was unexpectedly sent flying by a punch. His whole person formed a large character in the air, and then quickly became a small vanishing without a trace. Ling Han. Hun Yo pounced over and jumped into Ling Han's arms in an instant, hugging Ling Han like a big monkey. However, she was as beautiful as a goddess, so it would not ruin the scene. It only made everyone extremely envious of Ling Han. Ling Han smiled and hugged this little girl. They had not seen each other for another few hundred years, and he similarly missed her greatly. Ling Han, did you miss Nyo? Hun Yo asked delicately. She acted as if there was no one else around, and did not care what the people around them thought of her at all. However, it was a pity for Zhu Xuega. Who knew where he had been tossed to now? I missed my Nyo, Ling Han said. Hun Yo was very pleased, and her beautiful face was all smiles. She kissed Ling Han's cheek heavily. Ling Han, let's have monkeys. This little girl still did not know what it meant to be embarrassed at all. Cough. The Empress coughed lightly, a dignified expression on her face. Another great bewitching spirit. Hun Yo turned around and could not help but bare her teeth, revealing a fierce expression, full of hostility. Nyo seems to have seen you before. When she saw the Empress, it was only a clone. Her appearance was different, but they only had the same aura. Ling Han, who is this great bewitching spirit? Hun Yo turned around and asked, hugging Ling Han, unwilling to let go. A family, Ling Han said with a smile. Nyo is not a family with her. Hun Yo stared at the Empress, killing intent burning in her eyes, not concealing it at all. The Empress was unafraid, and also stared at Hun Yo. The two women simultaneously burned with a burning fighting spirit. In their eyes, settling each other and becoming the most important person by Ling Han's side was extremely important, even surpassing everything else. Cough. Since everyone is here, then let's sit down and discuss martial art together. Yan Xianlu adjusted his emotions. He thought that he had lost to Hun Yo because of his physique, and physique would only give him an advantage before the Celestial King tier. After advancing into the Celestial King tier, the regulations of the heaven were all equal. He was able to pick up and let go. He had already walked out of the shadow of his previous loss, and could face it calmly. This time, he had gathered everyone here not just for the Celestial King tier achieving Dao Stone, but also for an extremely important reason. He definitely could not be disturbed because of that little accident previously. Thus, he naturally could not allow Hun Yo and the Empress to continue fighting over his affections like this. He stepped out to stop the two women from continuing to bicker. Shut up. Hun Yo and the Empress turned around at the same time, their might astonishing. Yan Xianlu, it was more refreshing to read on his phone. Chapter 1930. Shut up. There was actually someone who dared tell Yan Xianlu to shut up right in front of him. Hiss, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and an expression of disbelief appeared on their faces. Not one, but two. How bold. What background did these two women have to be able to come here? They had to be top-notch emperor tiers. Could it be that they didn't even have this concept, and had to be extremely respectful towards Yan Xianlu? Putting aside the fact that he was the heir of an 8th heaven celestial king, he himself was also a monarch tier, so wasn't that enough? But what shocked everyone even more was that after Yan Xianlu was rebuked, he actually did not get angry. He merely shook his head, showing an expression of helplessness. It had to be that Yen Xianlu didn't fight with women. But not everyone thought so. They looked at Hunyeo. This was a person they had never seen before, and if they, top-notch emperor tiers, couldn't even remember this, then they couldn't be called emperor tiers in vain. This young girl had come uninvited, and Yen Xianlu actually did not fly into a rage. What did this mean? She's that demonic young girl. Scammer. Someone recognized Hunyeo. These were the few people that Hunyeo had overtaken along the way. Though there were many paths to the top of the mountain, there were also many people here. Thus, after Hunyeo chose a path, there would definitely be a great many people that she had overtaken, and they naturally would also suffer greatly because of her. Immediately, at least 10 people targeted Hunyeo, all of them seething with anger. Though Hunyeo was also shockingly beautiful, her style was completely different from the Empress's. The Empress was noble and graceful, and thought that everyone in the world should submit to her. She had a pride that was deeply rooted in her very bones. Hunyeo was wild and willful, and the little movements that she revealed were extremely mischievous, just like a child that could not grow up. Precisely because of this, Hunyeo did not have a strong presence like the Empress, so beautiful that she could steal one's soul. In truth, if the Empress did what she did, there would probably be very few that could be angry. Of course, the Empress would not do such a risky thing either. Hunyeo bared her teeth, like an enraged female leopard. What, you guys want to fight? Those dozen or so people were naturally even more furious. You caused us to be stepped on by manifestations, and you actually did not feel the slightest bit of embarrassment. Hee, everyone, please calm down. Yen Xianlu stepped forward and pressed his hands together. You should listen to me first, and tell me the reason why I have invited everyone here this time. He must be very depressed right now. If it was in the past, he would definitely be the center of everyone. Everyone would stare at him without blinking once he said something. Why would he need to repeat it over and over again? But Hunyeo was too powerful. Even if he used his ultimate move, Hunyeo also had it, and it was an incredibly terrifying one at that. In an instant, she had shattered several tens of thousands of manifestations. This was something that he was far inferior to. However, Yen Xianlu was Yen Xianlu, after all. With his words, everyone suppressed their anger for the time being at least. Hunyeo wanted to glare again, but Ling Han stroked her head. Instantly, an expression of enjoyment appeared on her face, and she no longer fought back. Everyone clicked their tongues in wonder. Hunyeo was so fierce, but in front of Ling Han, she was so gentle. This was really inconceivable. But at the same time, he was also filled with jealousy towards Ling Han. After all, putting aside Hunyeo's ferocity, this was a great beauty with unparalleled beauty. Moreover, in front of Ling Han, wasn't this great beauty also as gentle as water? Why can't I meet a woman like this? Hunyeo continued to stare at the Empress. With Ling Han on the side, they definitely could not fight, but the battle had already begun. Ahem, this time, I have invited everyone here mainly because I want to form an alliance. Yen Xianlu finally got to the point. Haha. Shan Jitong immediately laughed loudly. An alliance? What a joke, making me form an alliance with these trash. His eyes swept over them, filled with disdain towards everyone. Of course, when his eyes swept over Hunyeo, his pupils contracted. Hunyeo's ferocity was right before his eyes. Yen Xianlu's expression became stern, and he said, Brother Shan, if you have any objections to this, you can leave immediately. There is no need to mock and ridicule us, but I can tell you that you will definitely regret it. Shan Jitong was startled, and showed a sliver of hesitation. Should he immediately flick his sleeves and leave, or stay and listen? If he stayed, that would be a little like slapping himself in the face, but Yen Xianlu actually said that he would regret it, so he definitely had great confidence. Monarch tiers like them definitely would not make up nonsense at this kind of time. After hesitating again and again, Shan Jitong still sat back down on his original rock. He made up his mind that he would not speak again in the future. Even if Shan Jitong slapped himself, how could the others dare laugh at him? They were all expressionless, acting as if they had not seen anything. Only Lao Song's lips curled up in a cold smirk, expressing his disdain towards Shan Jitong. How fun! Meanwhile, Hunyeo clapped her hands, her voice very crisp and clear. Shan Jitong only acted as if he had not seen or heard anything and closed his eyes. Out of sight, out of mind. Everyone clicked their tongues in wonder. It seemed like both Yan Xianlu and Shan Jitong were full of restraint towards this young girl, which made everyone even more curious. Who exactly was this girl? This time, Yan Xianlu was rather grateful to Hunyeo. Even he could not possibly completely suppress Shan Jitong, but Hunyeo could. True enough, evil people needed to be tempered by evil people. The celestial realm is very large. Merely the boundless seas are enough to separate the eastern and western celestial realms, and our eastern celestial realm is further divided into 33 heavens. Yan Xianlu began to introduce his geographical knowledge. This caused some people to show expressions of impatience. Had they come to listen to this? However, there were also a great many whose expressions did not change at all. If they could become top-notch emperor tiers, how could they possibly not even have this bit of patience? Furthermore, would Yan Xianlu say these things for no reason? Our calm peace heaven, to be honest, can only be ranked at the bottom of the 33 heavens, on par with the wide prosperity heaven and the far south heaven, Yan Xianlu said calmly. Not to mention that the overall strength of the western celestial realm is above that of the eastern celestial realm. In the whole celestial realm, our calm peace heaven can only be ranked at the bottom. Some time ago, I planned to make a trip to the western celestial realm, but in the end, I did not make the trip. Instead, I went to the wide prosperity heaven, planning to train there first. In the end, I encountered an opponent that I was no match for. Suddenly, the crowd was in an uproar. Who was Yan Xianlu? He was a divine fetus born on the celestial path, and it was very likely that he was an existence nurtured by heaven and earth. He should be a supreme monarch tier that was absolutely invincible among his peers, so how could he possibly be defeated by someone? Brother Yan, it should be that opponent's cultivation level is too high, right? Someone immediately asked with a smile, holding on to a sliver of hope. Yan Xianlu shook his head and said, "That's not the case. That person is the same as I, both fifth severance." When these words were spoken, everyone fell silent. Shan Jitong opened his mouth to speak, but ultimately could not speak. He was very unconvinced, but he knew his own limits. His battle prowess should be slightly inferior to Yan Xianlu's, so even Yan Xianlu was no match for him. So what did he count as? Lao Song was much calmer, though his pair of seductive eyes had become even more slender, like that of a venomous snake. That person's name is Shi Xiuwen, Yan Xianlu continued. According to him, his strength can only rank 9th in the wide prosperity heaven. Pooh, a considerable number spluttered. Impossible. Impossible. Yan Xianlu was so powerful, yet he was actually defeated by someone who was merely ranked 9th in the wide prosperity heaven. How could anyone believe this? Chapter 1932. Blazing flame lightning strike wood is born with many twists and turns. In the process of growth, it will continuously be burned by blazing flames and struck by divine lightning, Yan Xianlu began to introduce. In terms of quantity, blazing flame lightning strike wood should be the most abundant among the source powers of heaven and earth. When the last flaming lightning struck tree dies, countless flaming lightning struck trees will be born, but they're just seedlings. Countless of them will die during this period, and when one of them successfully advances, the other seedlings will wither at the same time. This is a source power of heaven and earth, so even if we cannot obtain the acknowledgement of the blazing flame lightning strike wood, even if we can only obtain a withered seedling, it will be of great help to us in comprehending the regulations of wood. He paused, and then continued, "What my master discovered was not a single blazing flame lightning strike wood, but a forest of lightning strike wood. A forest of blazing flame lightning strike wood, and only one tree king could stand out and become a new source power of heaven and earth." When they heard him say this, those who were initially not very interested all became restless. It was too difficult to obtain the acknowledgement of a source power of heaven and earth. Basically, only celestial kings could do it, but if they could obtain a withered seedling of a lightning strike wood, that would indeed be a precious treasure, and it was guaranteed that every ascending origin tier would go crazy for it. Ling Han, do you want it? Hu Niu asked as she stuck to Ling Han's embrace. Niu will snatch it for you. Her eyes shone, no different from that little girl of the past. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh loudly. When he thought of the various experiences he and Hu Niu had previously, an indescribable sense of bliss rose up in him. I want to join. I want to join too. Immediately, a great many people volunteered, wanting to join Yan Xianlu's team. Though Shan Jitong and Lao Song were also incredibly tempted, they respected their status and did not say it out loud. Instead, they were waiting for Yan Xianlu to take the initiative to invite them. Yet, it was as if Yan Xianlu had not arrived, completely ignoring their existence. Basically, everyone said they wanted to go to that mystery realm of heaven and earth. Yan Xianlu did not accept everyone. That formation could stack the power of 10 people, or even increase it tenfold. That would definitely be a huge pressure on everyone. If they did not have the support of a powerful physique, then there was no need for their opponents to break the formation. They themselves would collapse first. As the saying went, it was better to have nothing than to have something inferior. After choosing for a long while, Yan Xianlu had only chosen 6 people. Finally, Shan Jitong and Lao Song showed expressions of pride. No matter how capable you, Yan Xianlu, were, in the end, you still had to take the initiative to extend an invitation to them. Miss, are you interested in joining us? Yan Xianlu extended an invitation to Hu Niu. Niu doesn't want that. Hu Niu said in disgust, and glared at Yan Xianlu. You dare have any ideas about Niu, I'll chop off your dog head and feed it to the dogs. Ling Han was sweating profusely. Wasn't this letting his own kind kill each other? Yan Xianlu was snubbed and could only rub his nose. However, Hu Niu was indeed strong, and it was very possible that she was not weaker than Shi Xiuwen. She did not need to rely on the formation at all to be able to fight against her. However, no matter what, Hu Niu was still a member of the Calm Peace Heaven, so it was fine even if she did not join his team. My master said that this is an opportunity for everyone in the Calm Peace Heaven, so I'll be bringing everyone there when the time comes. After entering the secret realm, I hope everyone can help each other. After all, our enemy is Wide Prosperity Heaven. Yan Xianlu said solemnly. If I discover that someone is still actively provoking internal strife in the secret realm, then don't blame me for not being polite in the future. Dang! Everyone nodded. At present, they were all competitors, but if Wide Prosperity Heaven joined in, then they would be a whole, and their fists should all be directed outwards. Brother Yan, can I lend you a hand? Lao Song was the first to relent. Yan Xianlu had already raised the topic to the overall situation of the whole Calm Peace Heaven. In comparison, his restraint naturally appeared pretentious. Of course, Yan Xianlu said smilingly. Brother Yan, there's me too. Shan Jitong could only say shamelessly. Yan Xianlu nodded, but did not follow up on his victory to mock Shan Jitong. He had lofty ambitions, and disdained to use this kind of method to attack his opponent. Moreover, he was already the strongest among the younger generation of the Calm Peace Heaven, and did not treat Shan Jitong as an opponent at all. His target was the supreme monarch tier of the other 33 heavens of the Eastern Celestial Realm. Hu Niu was not willing to join, and this caused Yan Xianlu to be slightly disappointed. If he could obtain such an elite to join his team, his chances of victory would increase greatly. However, seeing that Hu Niu was so attached to Ling Han, he decided to use a roundabout strategy. Ling Han, we finally meet. He smiled slightly. Ling Han nodded and said, I have long heard of your great name, and you have not disappointed me. Hiss! When they heard Ling Han's words, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. How arrogant of you! A mere alchemist, where did you get such arrogant courage? Yan Xianlu couldn't help but be slightly angered. Though Zhao Qingfeng had not been killed by Ling Han, it could still be attributed to Ling Han. His subordinate had been killed, and with his protective personality he was actually already very displeased with Ling Han. However, Ling Han was too young. His talent in alchemy was astonishing, and his potential in martial art was also not bad. That was why he invited Ling Han, intending to recruit Ling Han. In his eyes, he, the king of the younger generation of the calm peace heaven, had extended an olive branch, and Ling Han naturally could only gladly agree. With Hun Yo's support, had he gotten carried away? "Are you willing to join our team?" he asked calmly. This was for Hun Yo's sake. Ling Han cracked a smile and said, "I am a bit stubborn. As the saying goes, I'd rather be the head of a chicken than the tail of an ox. Come, let's have a spar. If I win, you guys will join me, and I will be your leader." This was really not afraid of the wind cutting his tongue. Yet Yen Xianlu was not angered. In his eyes, Ling Han was only a madman, and there was absolutely no need to take the words of a madman to heart. He asked calmly, "And if you lose? Then I'll just leave." "I've already said, I won't be the tail of an ox," Ling Han said smilingly. Everyone fainted. "So it turned out that others should listen to you? Ling Han, awesome." Hun Yo planted a kiss on Ling Han's cheek, feeling very pleased. On the side, the Empress similarly wore a proud expression. How could her husband possibly be subordinate to others? What a joke! Yen Xianlu was also startled. "You're too shameless, aren't you?" His expression darkened and he said, "All right, then let's exchange a few moves." He was going to teach Ling Han a lesson, and let the latter know that it was a very shameful thing to borrow someone else's power. Ling Han patted Hun Yo's back, indicating for her to come down. Don't, just hug Nyo like this and fight." Hun Yo hugged Ling Han, unwilling to let go. At present, she did not want to leave Ling Han's side for even a moment. Ling Han thought for a moment and walked out just like that. At his cultivation level, not to mention hugging one person, even hugging 10,000 people would basically not affect his battle prowess. Since the little girl was begging him like this, then he would just satisfy her little wish. "Come." Ling Han crooked a finger at Yen Xianlu. Was he challenging the strongest in the severing mundane tier? He was too careless. Yet Yen Xianlu did not dare to be careless. He was deeply aware of Hun Yo's strength. If she also made a move, then the possibility of him being defeated was very high. Chapter 1933. Yen Xianlu strode out, his brocade robes fluttering. His handsomeness was not earth-shattering, but his bearing was otherworldly, inspiring admiration. This was originally a very solemn matter, but Yen Xianlu's opponent actually had a slender young girl hanging off his body like a koala. No matter how comical this was, how comical! "Are you really going to fight?" Yen Xianlu's expression was dark. At first, he had planned very well, gathering the power of all the prodigies to activate the celestial fate. He would first obtain the Celestial King Achieving Tao Stone, and after refining it, he would improve his physique, then lead everyone to charge into the mystery realm to seize the source power of heaven and earth. If he obtained a source power of heaven and earth, he really would not fear anyone in the same cultivation level. However, an accident occurred at the very first step. Though he very quickly suppressed his disappointment, he could not possibly forget it just like that. Though the celestial stone was obtained by Hun Yo, if one looked at the source, it was actually Ling Han's fault. If it were not for Ling Han, how could Hun Yo have come here? Old enmity, new hatred, caused Yen Xianlu to especially loathe this villain, Ling Han. Putting on an act, using his connections to intimidate others. He stretched out his right hand. Wang, the surrounding air vibrated, forming a transparent sword in his hand. Because of the refraction of light, the existence of this sword could be seen. Ling Han smiled, one hand holding Hun Yo, the other pushing forward. 4 fingers curled into a fist, and only a thumb pressed out towards Yen Xianlu. Advancing into the 5th severance, forming a world of its own, and every movement would be a powerful attack. Go! Yen Xianlu struck out with his sword. Instantly, light filled the skies, dazzling the 9 heavens. Ling Han maintained his press of the finger. The millions and millions of stars in his body all shone, the Tao of heaven and earth reaching out to grab. He pressed down, and the heaven and earth resonated, turning into a dragon, and then a phoenix. The dragon and phoenix danced together, greeting the sword light. Boom! The sword light clashed with the dragon and phoenix, exploding into an incredibly dazzling light, as if it had become a sun, illuminating the world. When the light dissipated, Ling Han and Yen Xianlu were still standing facing each other. Neither had taken a step back, and neither had any signs of being injured. What? Seeing this scene, everyone exploded in shock. Ling Han actually had the ability to battle Yen Xianlu. Hiss, Yen Xianlu was a monarch tier. The fifth severance was far, far too difficult. In the whole of the calm peace heaven, there were at least several hundred celestial king tier sects, and there were close to 20 at least above the fifth heaven, but what about monarch tiers? At least, among the present severing mundane tiers, only a mere 3 people had reached this level. Emperors, of course, should be invincible. But now, it was extremely likely that a 4th monarch tier had appeared. It was not extremely likely, but definitely. Otherwise, no matter how strong a 4th severance was, it was impossible for him to receive a strike from a 5th severance. That would be an absolute suppression. Everyone was enlightened. No wonder Ling Han dared to be so arrogant. Emperors were naturally arrogant. But aren't you an alchemist? How can an alchemist be so fierce? Damn, Yen Xianlu's eyes lit up. He was not envious because he had gained another monarch-level opponent. On the contrary, his fighting spirit was blazing, and there was even a kind of gratification. The calm peace heaven was too weak, and urgently needed the emergence of a few monarch tiers. Only then could there possibly be more celestial kings and high-level celestial kings in the future. Otherwise, with the fierce competition in the celestial realm, it was possible that the calm peace heaven would be invaded by other forces, and a great reshuffle would occur. "All right," he exclaimed softly. "Previously I had thought that you were arrogant, but I was wrong about you. I apologize to you." Ling Han smiled and said, "At first, I had also thought that you were an arrogant and haughty person, but now, I have also taken back such thoughts. You are a good person." The two of them exchanged a smile, and actually had a mutual appreciation for each other. There were too few monarch tiers, and every one of them could become an extremely good opponent and confidant. "Ling Han, don't waste words with him. Quickly defeat him. Niu still wants to kiss you," Hu Niu said shamelessly as she wrapped her arms around Ling Han's neck. She was open and frank, and said whatever she had on her mind. Ling Han could only shrug and said, "Brother Yen, then let's limit it to 10 moves." His impression of Yen Xianlu had changed greatly, so he naturally did not insist on defeating the latter and stepping on him. "All right, 10 moves." Yen Xianlu nodded. He was indeed very proud, but he was also human. Emperor tiers, king tiers, so what right did they have to make him lower himself to face them? Only monarch tiers could treat him as equals. This was actually very normal. Ling Han moved, and his figure charged out like a streak of light. Yen Xianlu did not show any weakness, and began a battle with Ling Han. Ping 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 ping. The two of them did not hold back, and used one celestial technique after another, displaying their strongest side. 10 moves very quickly passed. The two of them stopped at the same time, and exchanged a smile. All their previous grudges had been resolved. This was a kind of mutual appreciation between men. "Let's descend the mountain." They walked side by side, heading down the mountain. Because there were no manifestations causing trouble, their speed was naturally not slow. After 10 days, they had arrived at the foot of the mountain. "Gagaga, brat, do you think you can escape from my grasp?" Amidst strange laughter, an old man suddenly appeared. Boom, endless might spread out, startling the 33 heavens. The expressions of all the prodigies changed slightly. They were all emperor tiers and monarch tiers in the same cultivation level, but that was only limited to the same cultivation level. Even monarch tiers could match Yang Soul or even Yin Soul, but this old man was definitely not in the dividing soul tier, but had far surpassed it. However, though everyone was shocked, none of them were afraid. This was a gathering hosted by Yen Xianlu, and behind Yen Xianlu was an 8th heaven celestial king. If someone still came to cause trouble at such a gathering, then where would Yen Xianlu and the eternal prosperity celestial king put their face? If this old man wanted to make a move, then a celestial king would definitely appear and directly blast him into pieces. Ling Han's eyes narrowed and he said, "Old demon blood shadow, brat, I really did not misjudge you. I had initially thought that you would need 10 million years to be able to obtain the natural peach seal for me, but I had not thought that you would actually only use a few years. Not bad, not bad, why don't you quickly hand it over to me now? Old Demon Blood Shadow said, his expression filled with anticipation. Everyone was afraid of death, what more for this kind of high and mighty figure? He had suffered from the immortal's tribulation, and if it flared up again next time, he would definitely be done for. Thus, he was naturally incredibly thirsty for the natural peach seal, causing even a mighty ascending origin tier ancestor to lose his composure. Ling Han shrugged and said, I'm really sorry, but it has already been used up. Used up? Old Demon Blood Shadow was tongue-tied. His first reaction was disbelief, unable to accept this kind of truth, because he had pinned all his hopes of survival on this. When he suddenly heard this news, his whole head was struck with a boom. Then he suddenly flew into a great rage. Brat, you dare deceive me, do you not want your life anymore? His gaze was sinister, exuding a powerful killing intent. This brat actually dared to trick him. How could he be so audacious? Xiao, just at this moment, a figure suddenly charged out, pressing a palm down at Ling Han. Z, endless lightning flashed, its might incredibly terrifying. Ba Yao he had already been waiting for Ling Han for a very long time, and the moment he saw Ling Han appear, he immediately made his move. He did not need any natural peach seal, so his move was a fatal one. He wanted to kill Ling Han and directly seize the treasures on him. Chapter 1934. You dare! Old Demon Blood Shadow roared and moved to attack Ba Yao. It was not that he could not bear to lose Ling Han's life, but he did not know whether the natural peach seal had been brought out by Ling Han or not. If it had been brought out, then there was no harm in killing Ling Han. He could just take it away. But what if he had not, and was still in Alchemy City? Then what was he doing all this trouble for? Furthermore, he too suspected that Ling Han had a rare treasure on him, and had long since decided to kill Ling Han after he had obtained the natural peach seal, and take all of the latter's fortune. Naturally, he could not allow Ling Han to die at the hands of another. Thus, he immediately moved, and was extremely ruthless. Ba Yao was slightly startled. This old bastard actually dared to make a move against him? Are your dog eyes blind? Do you know who I am? You're courting death, he rebuked coldly, and turned around to deliver a palm strike at Old Demon Blood Shadow. Z, lightning overflowed, turning into a long lightning river. Endless patterns of great Tao surged within, terrifying beyond compare. Old Demon Blood Shadow paled in shock. They were both in the ascending origin tier, but the gap between him and the other was practically indescribably wide. With a single strike, Old Demon Blood Shadow was sent flying. Pooh, a mist of blood shot out of his whole body, his aura dropping endlessly. He was only in the ascending origin tier small mastery, but Ba Yao had cultivated it to the consummate level. The gap between them was completely incalculable. Old Demon Blood Shadow fell, and barely managed to straighten his body. His head of white hair floated down. At first, it was already sparse, but now, the middle area was completely empty, and he had become bald. His complexion was frighteningly pale, and his left eye was even protruding out of its socket, appearing very frightening. Pooh! He continuously threw up blood, and as he did so, his hair fell out. Every mouthful of blood was flickering with lightning. This was because Ba Yao's attack was too frightening, penetrating deep into his bones. Old Demon Blood Shadow could not help but pale with fright. In the first place, because of the immortal's tribulation, his blood essence had dried up, and he had turned from a handsome and elegant man into a terrible old man. Now that Ba Yao's attack had directly injured his life force, every mouthful of blood he spat out was equivalent to using up a sliver of his life force. This caused the old injuries left behind by Immortal's tribulation to become restless, and they began to slash at his cultivation. His aura instantly plummeted, falling from the ascending origin tier to the Immortal Palace tier, then the 5th Palace tier, 4th Palace tier, 3rd Palace tier, and then all the way to the 1st Palace tier. However, he was still unable to stop his aura from plummeting to the Dividing Soul tier, and then from the Heaven Soul tier. Is that an exaggeration? Not at all. The consummate level of the ascending origin tier in the first place possessed the ability to kill a small tier cultivator with a single strike, and though Ba Yao had only done so casually, how could the former holy son of the Thundercloud Palace be insignificant? Added with the fact that old demon Bloodshadow was nearing the end of his lifespan, his battle prowess would be able to reach a fraction of his peak condition. Not only did the attack not kill him, but his cultivation had also fallen. This was already very good. Old demon Bloodshadow's cultivation level fell all the way to the middle stage of Insoul, and only then did he barely manage to stop it. This made his limbs go numb, and an endless despair welled up in him. Yes, cultivation level could be recultivated. He could still cultivate from Yin Soul to Earth Soul, Heaven Soul, and all the way up. But if his life force was injured again, how long could he live? 100 years? 10,000 years? Before he could cultivate to the ascending origin tier, and break through to great accomplishment to replenish his life force, and obtain an endless lifespan, he would have long since died. In other words, though Ba Yao's attack had not killed him, it had still sentenced him to death. Old demon Bloodshadow trembled. 100 million years would pass very quickly, and his present lifespan might not even be 100 years, so how could he not tremble in fear? All this took a long time to describe, but was actually only the matter of 1 or 2 breaths. The process of the exchange was also as fast as lightning, and severing mundane tiers practically could not see it clearly. What had happened? Everyone was a little dumbfounded. Why did they feel that the scene was a little off? Was an old demon Bloodshadow here to make trouble for Ling Han? Why had he moved on his behalf instead, and in such a miserable state? This was definitely true love. Ba Yao only glanced at old demon Bloodshadow calmly, and then withdrew his gaze. Though the latter was also in the ascending origin tier, in his eyes, he was a minor character. Aside from ascending origin tiers that had come from Celestial King tier forces, who else would he take seriously? Overestimating one's capabilities, he did not kill him either. Killing this kind of trash would only be a waste of time. I am very interested in the things on you, Ba Yao said, his eyes fixed on Ling Han. At first, he did not want to waste words, and directly kill him to snatch his treasures. With his soul extracted, no secrets could possibly be hidden. However, since he had been stopped by someone and had failed once, he was magnanimous and unruffled. After all, as an ascending origin tier elite, face was still important. Previously, he had succeeded in his attack and directly fled far away. He had complete confidence that even Yen Xianlu could forget about seeing his appearance clearly and remembering his aura. So what? Ling Han asked smilingly, without the slightest hint of fear. No matter what they are, they all belong to me now, Ba Yao said calmly. Soundlessly, he had already locked down the surrounding space. In this way, unless a celestial king specially swept his divine sense over, it was impossible for him to discover what had happened here. In this way, everything was under his control. Ling Han shook his head. I don't think so, brat. Do you think this is still Alchemy City? Ba Yao scoffed. There were too many heirs of celestial kings here, and there was even a super prodigy like Yen Xianlu. He naturally did not dare to kill recklessly. But what about Ling Han? He knew very well that the other was only a mere holy son of Alchemy City. So what if he killed him? Even if Alchemy City went to the Thundercloud Palace to complain, so what? What could they do to him? What a joke. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "This is indeed not Alchemy City, and there is no master to stand up for me. However, there are many wondrous things in this world. Oh, for example?" Ba Yao asked casually as he strode towards Ling Han. His speed was not fast, but it was as if the great Tao was crushing down with each step, causing everyone's hearts to feel indescribably uncomfortable. The might of an ascending origin tier. How could a severing mundane tier match it? He deliberately walked very slowly because previously, in Alchemy City, he had been forced to leave by Grandmaster Zicheng and had lost all face. Though he was not taking revenge on alchemist Zicheng now, Ling Han was the cause of everything. He still felt a little good torturing him before killing him. Of course, this was completely because he had absolute confidence. Otherwise, he would directly kill him, search his soul, seize his treasure, and leave. Thud, he walked over step by step, and a great many people immediately showed expressions of discomfort, feeling as if their hearts were about to explode. That was really the case. Under such terrifying pressure, everyone's eyeballs were popping out, looking frighteningly savage. Damn it! Hunyo was furious, pointing a finger at Ba Yao. Damn big guy, you actually dare be fierce to Nyo's Ling Han, and dare make Nyo feel uncomfortable. You're dead for sure. Ba Yao naturally would not take Hunyo's threat to heart. He only scoffed, and the gaze he directed at Hunyo was a little sinister. He had never abstained from female charms, especially after being stuck in the ascending origin tier for too long a time. He had developed a great many hobbies, and the area between men and women was naturally one of them. Furthermore, it took up an extremely large portion of his time. This young girl was both beautiful and pure. Though she was a little fierce, what use could she be in front of him? Oh, I'm dead for sure. Ba Yao shook his head. I don't believe it. You should believe it. An icy cold voice rang out behind Ba Yao, filled with dense killing intent. Chapter 1936. Brat come. Old Demon Blood Shadow waved the blood shadow behind him, an unnatural flush on his pale face. His life force had been greatly depleted, and it was actually already not easy for him to linger on while at death's door. This battle would definitely cause his originally ridiculously short lifespan to approach the end. But he already saw this battle as his last hope of survival, and had bet everything on it, so he naturally did not care. Take down Ling Han. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, Old bastard, you will only be beaten to a pulp by me. Xiao, his figure charged out and he punched out. You overestimate yourself. Old Demon Blood Shadow said proudly. Though his cultivation level had dropped, he was still in soul level no matter what. Even if he ignored a major tier, he was still 2 minor levels higher than Ling Han. He stretched out a right hand that was like a withered claw, and grabbed towards Ling Han's right wrist. Wang, the stars in Ling Han's body shone, drawing on great Tao and drawing on the power of regulation. An ancient seal immediately appeared on his fist, which looked a little like a ball of flames. This was a seal of great Tao drawn from the 9 heavens flame, celestial king tier level. Unfortunately, Ling Han's cultivation level was too low, and this seal of great Tao was also incomplete, giving off a feeling of dilapidation, but an ancient and noble aura was faintly spreading, shaking the 9 heavens. Old Demon Blood Shadow's expression changed slightly. The might of this strike from Ling Han had greatly surpassed his expectations. A severing mundane tier could actually be so strong? Hold on. He suddenly recalled a legend. It was said that there was a supreme prodigy that could break through the restraints of heaven and earth, and deliver another strike after the 4th severance. 5th severance and could rival Yang Soul. Hiss, this guy was actually a legendary monster. Don't blame old Demon Blood Shadow for being ignorant. Though he was an ascending origin tier, he had always been a loner and did not have any great sex to rely on, so how could he possibly know too many secrets? Being able to react, it was already very good that there were still 5th severance prodigies in this world. Old Demon Blood Shadow's claw approached, its speed becoming slower and slower. That seal on Ling Han's fist had already come into effect, preventing him from invading. Amidst the intense friction, his palm began to burn with flames. The old bastard did not mind, but when he stretched out a few more inches, he discovered that his right hand was actually in extreme pain. The burn will hurt. It wasn't because of the intense friction that caused the fire, but because the symbols that Ling Han had condensed had triggered the laws of fire and burned his skin. How is that possible? His expression changed in shock. Even if Ling Han was a 5th severance, which was equivalent to a Yang Soul elite, he himself still had Yin Soul tier level cultivation, so how could he possibly be wounded by Ling Han? Old bastard, you're only able to bully me because your cultivation level is much higher than mine. Putting aside the fact that we're at the same cultivation level, even if you're 2 cultivation levels higher than me, I'd still be able to suppress you. Ling Han roared. His figure suddenly advanced, and he threw a punch that contained all of his fury. The black murderous curse could indeed temper him, but being forcefully planted in his body was naturally a different concept. Don't say that only a few years had passed in the real world, but added with the years that he had spent in the time cultivation chamber, that was a few hundred years' time, and had endured the agony of the black murderous curse several hundred times. Every time it flared up, Ling Han would want to give old demon blood shadow a good thrashing. Adding it up again and again, his fury had also accumulated to the limit, and now, it was time to vent it all out to his heart's content. A punch shot out, and the regulations turned into something tangible. Innumerable seals could be seen appearing, incredibly profound. Ling Han and old demon blood shadow both took a few steps back, and both found their footing. They were evenly matched in this exchange. Old demon blood shadow's expression was extremely ugly. He had now placed all his hopes on Ling Han, wanting to capture him and then use him to threaten a celestial king. But Ling Han was actually so strong that his wishful thinking was about to come to nothing. His lifespan might only be 100 years, and presently he was forcibly burning what little life force he had left in battle. Who knew he might directly die in the midst of battle? He did not want to die, did not want to die. Old demon blood shadow roared loudly. Boom, the blood shadow behind him surged madly, and then turned into a gale that swept toward Ling Han. When it had circulated for a certain distance, this gale actually dispersed, and turned into black dots that filled the sky. Ling Han's gaze swept over them, and saw that these black dots were actually numerous insects that fluttered about in the sky, making buzzing sounds. Every insect was about the same appearance as a mosquito, but they were much larger. They were about the size of a little finger, and they had a long proboscis that was incredibly sharp, and even exuded a metallic luster. The insects filled the sky, descending toward Ling Han. In that one instant, Ling Han's body was covered with mosquitoes. All of them used their sharp proboscis to stab him, desiring to suck his blood. Ling Han did not move. He wanted to see if these things could do anything to his physique. Old demon blood shadow revealed a cold smile. This brat was too arrogant. He completely did not know that these blood shadow insects were his trump card, and could even be used in tandem with the black murderous curse. When the blood shadow insects attacked, he would then activate the black murderous curse, attacking from within and without. If one only cared about the inside of one's body, then the blood shadow insects would pierce through one's body and suck one's blood. These blood shadow insects were actually formed from a portion of his soul, and the blood essence they sucked could be fed back to him. Though it would not allow his life force to recover, it would at least be of some benefit. And if one cared about the outside, the black murderous curse could similarly steal one's life. What old demon blood shadow needed to control was not to accidentally activate the black murderous curse too much and kill Ling Han. That way, he would not be able to threaten that celestial king. Explode, he exclaimed softly. Ling Han instantly felt his heart wrench, and his entire body was in indescribable pain. Gagaga, do you think that the black murderous curse can only activate once a year? Old demon blood shadow scoffed. Since this black murderous curse was planted by this old man, then as long as this old man wills it, it can activate at any time. Kneel before this old man. The old thing was just feeling very pleased with himself, when he suddenly revealed an expression of disbelief. Because Ling Han was standing perfectly fine, and did not reveal any expression of pain. Furthermore, none of the blood shadow insects were able to pierce through his skin either. It was as if that was not a person at all, but a supreme divine metal. How was this possible? This time, old demon blood shadow's heart and spirit were truly trembling. Firstly, he did not dare to believe it, and secondly, he would not be able to take down Ling Han like this, and then he would not be far from death. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, I have already endured this black murderous curse several hundred times, and have long since become able to endure it. Monster. Old demon blood shadow completely did not dare to believe it. How tyrannical and painful was the black murderous curse? This was not a technique that he had created, but he had obtained it in an ancient cave abode, and it was extremely likely that it had been created by a celestial king. He had once used it on many people who had claimed that their will was as tough as iron, but at most 3 times, every single one of them would wail miserably and beg for mercy, and do whatever he wanted them to do. For example, there was a person who had claimed that he was madly in love with his wife, and when he could not endure the black murderous curse, he killed his wife with his own hands. There was an immortal palace realm elite who had claimed to be a chaste woman, and after being afflicted with the black murderous curse, she endured the humiliation and entered a brothel, where she was casually toyed with by lowly cultivators. This caused old demon Blood Shadow to be filled with confidence in the black murderous curse. No one would be able to withstand the pain after the curse was activated. Chapter 1937. But what about Ling Han? He had endured several hundred curses. It should be noted that only 4 or 5 years had passed, and that black murderous curse should have only flared up 4 or 5 times, so how could there be as many as several hundred? There was only one possibility. Ling Han had entered the time cultivation chamber. Thus, 4 or 5 years had passed normally, but he had experienced several hundred years. How could anyone be like this? The black murderous curse was clearly so painful that it could make even the most resolute person obediently call him father. This was also the reason why he had been at ease in allowing Ling Han to go to Alchemy City. He was certain that Ling Han would definitely do as he pleased. Who would have thought that this freak would actually think that the number of times the black murderous curse flared up was too few, and had entered the time cultivation chamber of his own accord to torment it? Old demon Blood Shadow was really dumbfounded. He had never seen someone like Ling Han before. Was he still human? He was practically immortal metal in human form. Then die. A hint of madness flashed through old demon Blood Shadow's eyes. Since he could not take down Ling Han, and was destined to die, then he might as well kill Ling Han, and pull someone down with him. Die. His right hand spread out, as if he was pulling invisible threads. He had completely detonated the black murderous curse, intending to kill Ling Han. However, after this die, there was only the rustling of the mountain winds, and Ling Han was still standing perfectly fine. How was this possible? If you could endure the pain of the black murderous curse flared up, that could only mean that your willpower was terrifying, but he had now unleashed the fatal blow of the black murderous curse. This had nothing to do with willpower. It was directly taking someone's life. Why didn't you die? Ling Han broke into a grin, raised his right foot, and walked forward. With each step he took, a large number of blood shadow insects were shaken off his body. Before they could even land on the ground, they had already turned into regulations and dissipated. This was not a physical body, but rather a manifestation of old demon Blood Shadow's divided soul amalgamating the regulations of heaven and earth. Old fool, don't forget that you are more or less at the Een Soul tier now, so how much power can you unleash from the black murderous curse? Ling Han said calmly. How powerful was his physique? How could a Een Soul level attack possibly kill him? Old demon Blood Shadow's tongue was knotted, and he was completely unable to speak. Don't say it so easily. Even if you are a 5th severance, comparable to Yang Soul, you are still a minor level lower than him. Furthermore, the black murderous curse had already been planted and it would erupt within one's body. Even if one's cultivation realm was the same, it would still be able to easily kill one's opponent, let alone one whose cultivation realm was higher. What kind of monster had he provoked? The old man was now filled with regret. Originally, he still had a lifespan of over 100 million years. But now, his essence had been severely damaged, and then he had to burn the rest of his essence to forcefully start a battle. He had brought about his own destruction. If the heavens gave him another chance, he would definitely stay as far away from Ling Han as possible. He would kill this guy and snatch the treasures from him. Old demon Blood Shadow increasingly felt that Ling Han definitely had an astonishing treasure on him. Otherwise, how could he possibly be so powerful? Even at a time like this, you still refuse to give up your evil intentions. Ling Han humphed and strode forward. A large number of blood shadow insects landed, and his whole person was completely revealed, standing as straight as a spear. Send you on your way. Ling Han gave a battle cry. The 9 heavens flame flared, and he turned into a god of fire, blasting madly at old demon Blood Shadow. King tiers were invincible at the same cultivation level, and emperor tiers were invincible even if they surpassed 1 cultivation level. Then what about monarch tiers? Invincible over 2 cultivation levels? Fifth severance could be considered a different kind of yang soul, but it was ultimately not a yang soul, so it would definitely affect Ling Han's ability to battle surpassing cultivation levels. Thus, against a dividing soul tear, he still could not be invincible over 2 cultivation levels, but surpassing 1 cultivation level was a piece of cake. What more when old demon Bloodshadow was already at the end of his rope. Now that he had gone all out, old demon Bloodshadow immediately fell into a disadvantageous position. "Don't kill me," old demon Bloodshadow wailed. "I don't have many years left to live, either. Let me live, and let me deal with my funeral affairs." Ling Han only felt that this was inconceivable. Just how thick was this old bastard's skin? He even dared to say such words. He was shameless to the point that he had no bottom line. But thinking about it again, this old bastard had previously ambushed him, cursed him, and stolen the natural peach seal for him, which was already enough to prove his shamelessness. "You'd better be on your way soon, lest you go and bring disaster to others." Ling Han was merciless, every punch taking his life. "Ah, this old man will fight it out with you." Old demon Bloodshadow exploded with the last bit of his life force, but even so, he was still no match for Ling Han, and was still being suppressed. And his life force was pitifully little in the first place, so this kind of desperate fight would only be a flash in the pan, and very soon, it would wither away. This old man hates. The old bastard also knew that he could not hold on any longer, and roared 3 times in fury towards the skies. He simply gave up resisting. "You claim to be a prodigy of your generation, and you have the nerve to make a move against someone who does not fight back?" At first, Ling Han had thought that he already knew the bottom limit of this old bastard's shamelessness, and had never thought that the latter would be able to break through again. If he could not win, then so be it, but he actually said so confidently that he would not fight back. What kind of shamelessness did he have to be able to say that? He could not be bothered to reprimand him, and simply delivered a punch in his direction. Fuck you, die early and reincarnate early." Although he said that he did not fight back, when the punch arrived, old demon Bloodshadow still took a step back, and stretched out a hand to parry. To say nothing of Ling Han, even Yen Xianlu and the others did not know what to say. This old bastard had once been an ascending origin tier elite, at any rate, so how could he be so shameless? Shamelessness to the point of shaking the heavens and earth. Disgusting! Ling Han's fiery fists shot out continuously, and after a dozen or so punches, old demon Bloodshadow was blasted into smithereens. Old demon Bloodshadow's remnant soul still had not dissipated, and was drifting in the air, filled with a longing for life, but the remnant soul had no one to rely on, and very soon, it completely dissipated, completely erased from this world. "Ling Han, let's go play." Hunyeo ran over and hooked one of Ling Han's arms, a brilliant smile on her face. The Empress also walked over and hooked her arm around Ling Han's other arm to show her sovereignty. In front of other women, the Empress had always been calm, but Hunyeo indeed made her feel pressured. "Big Vixen, hurry up and let go of Nyo's Ling Han." Hunyeo was jealous. The Empress only swept a disdainful glance over and ignored her. She had no interest in arguing with this kind of little girl. "Waya, Nyo is so angry." Hunyeo flew into a rage, a fierce glint in her eyes, killing intense soaring. Ling Han could only mediate and pacify Hunyeo. "Brother Ling, you are going to be very busy, so I will make it short. There are about 10 years' time until the mystery realm opens, so you should prepare well. If you can reach the peak stage of the 5th severance before then, that would be best," Yen Xianlu said. He then added, "Do not underestimate the prodigies of the wide prosperity heaven. You can only match them if you reach the peak stage of the 5th severance." Previously he had exchanged 10 moves with Ling Han, and he felt that he had a slight upper hand, but even he was no match for Shi Xiuwen, so Ling Han naturally could not possibly be a match for him. Ling Han only nodded, and did not say that his strongest aspect was actually his physique. Furthermore, he had not used the 2 source powers of heaven and earth, the 9 heavens flame and Xianyin source water, as well as the 3 supreme regulations of the Black Tower. The other was right. He indeed had to reach the peak stage of the fifth severance as soon as possible. If he could avoid borrowing external power, then it was best not to. Then, goodbye at the Three Flowers Valley. Chapter 1938. Ling Han held the Empress and Hun Yo's hands and left. Lu Herong, meanwhile, could not stand Hun Yo's closeness towards Ling Han and hid in the shadows. However, as long as Hun Yo was in danger, she would definitely appear at the first instant. "Oh, that's right." Ling Han smacked his head, and with a shake of his right hand, he tossed Bewitching Maiden Ro out from his spatial god tool. Though this Bewitching Maiden could come out herself, she did not know the situation outside. If she was still on Three Yang Peak, it was possible that she would die the moment she came out. Bewitching Maiden Ro was startled at first, and then looked at Ling Han with a strange gaze. This guy actually gave her such a precious treasure without any conditions, and did not even ask for a word of thanks from her. This actually made her feel incredibly moved. After so many days, she naturally had already refined the heavenly Tao Jade, and made up for all the deficiencies on her path of cultivation. From striking herself, she had become striking the heaven and earth, and become an emperor tier, and a top-grade emperor tier at that. However, she immediately looked surprised because she had noticed Hun Yo. There was actually an exceptional beauty that could rival the Empress in this world? Yet Hun Yo's jealousy soared. She glared fiercely at Bewitching Maiden Ro and said, "Ling Han, you're so bad. Not only did you get a great bewitching maiden, you also got a vixen." Ling Han smiled and said, "Don't mess around, she's just a friend." Bewitching Maiden Ro revealed a meaningful smile and said, "Oh, just a friend?" This smile was seductive to the bone. "Vixen, if you dare to smile again, I'll chop off your fox head," Hun Yo said angrily. "Young Masterling, she's so fierce," Bewitching Maiden Ro said, and even deliberately hid behind Ling Han, looking very delicate. Damn it, Hun Yo shouted in anger, a vicious look on her face. "Don't tease her, be careful not to play yourself to death," the Empress said. Even she did not have the confidence to defeat Hun Yo, what more a weak opponent like Bewitching Maiden Ro. She said this because Hun Yo really knew how to kill, and she did not want Ling Han to lose a superb cultivation furnace. Bewitching Maiden Ro was also slightly regretful. Hun Yo's eyes and expression were definitely fierce and threatening, and she was not joking. However, she was also slightly unconvinced. Aside from the fact that she had not advanced into the fifth severance, she was definitely a top-tier being in the severing mundane tier. There was no need to fear Tigress. She can suppress you with a single finger. Ling Han nodded. Hun Yo is a fifth severance, so she might be slightly more powerful than me. After all, he had only just advanced into the fifth severance, yet Hun Yo was already at the peak stage of the fifth severance. Fifth severance instantly, Bewitching Maiden Ro could only be convinced. What she cultivated was charm techniques, and charm techniques were not only used to seduce men. She spoke eloquently, picking out all the things that Hun Yo liked, such as how much Ling Han liked her and how much he missed her. Instantly, the little girl grinned widely. "Vixen, don't think that Nyo doesn't know that you are flattering me, but you are still pleasing to the eye, so I'll spare you this once," Hun Yo said casually. She was not stupid at all. Ling Han also let out the heavenly phoenix divine maiden, which naturally made Hun Yo jealous again. Only after being hugged and comforted by Ling Han for a good while did her anger subside. After all, they had been separated for too long, and what she felt in her heart was even more yearning. Meanwhile, the two children made Hun Yo laugh loudly and exclaimed that they were very interesting. They returned to Alchemy City. With the Dragonhawk as a means of transportation, their speed naturally increased greatly, and they returned to Alchemy City after more than a month. Ling Han went to visit Grandmaster Zicheng, and after a simple explanation of the situation, he began to cultivate in seclusion again. There were too many things that he had to busy himself with. Firstly, he had to increase his prowess in alchemy and advance into the 3-star tier as soon as possible. Secondly, he also had to cultivate martial art and reach the peak stage of the 5th severance. After the trip to the mystery realm, he was going to break through to the dividing soul tier. In the celestial realm, one had to go to a special place to advance to every major tier, and in the case of the dividing soul tier, one had to go to different places to break through to the 4 minor tiers, unlike the severing mundane tier, which only needed to be broken through after the first severance, and there was no need to go. Like the severing mundane tier, there were also many places that could break through to the dividing soul tier, and breaking through in different places would also have a great impact on one's future battle prowess. Thus, he definitely had to choose the best place to break through to. Ling Han was already beginning to study this problem. With the help of the Black Tower and the reincarnation tree, this day should not be too far away. From time to time, the Empress and Hu Niu would bicker with each other, both wanting to suppress the other. This was especially the case for Hu Niu. There were several times when she wanted to secretly make a move and kill the Empress. Thankfully, Ling Han stopped her. The two women fought, and it was naturally Hu Niu who won, and the advantage was not just a little big. Firstly, the Empress had just advanced into the 5th severance, and secondly, it was true that Hu Niu was stronger in terms of celestial techniques, physique, and martial art, so the Empress's loss was not undeserved. However, after this battle, the enmity between the two women had dissipated. Though they could not be considered good sisters, they had reached some kind of tacit understanding and no longer fought with each other every day. Ling Han relaxed and focused on refining alchemical pills to break through to the peak stage of the 5th severance. In the Black Tower, there were now 3 more supreme regulations. Unfortunately, this could only be comprehended by Ling Han himself and could not be shared with others, which made Ling Han slightly disappointed. However, the Black Tower now also had the power of time, and the flow of time could be accelerated by 1,000 times, which was extremely astonishing. Though there were still 10 years, considering the distance and the like, he would have to set out a little earlier, so it could be considered as about 9 years. 9 years. The time for comprehending Tao was close to 330,000 years, and the time acceleration was also as high as 9,000 years, which was an extremely long time. The witching maiden Ro could also be considered to have passed the test, so Ling Han also threw her into the Black Tower. Towards friends, Ling Han was never stingy. Surprisingly, Lu Herong did not appear to stop them, but would occasionally appear at Ling Han's residence, looking at the place where the Black Tower was, pondering. After 7 years in real time, Ling Han still could not break through to 3-star alchemist, but in terms of spirit refinement, he had a breakthrough and advanced into the level of 3rd refinement. The higher one went, whether it was in martial art or alchemy, it was far too difficult to improve. Ling Han had to admit that a 3-star alchemist was still quite valuable. It was no wonder that 4th refinement was the lifetime limit for most alchemists, and even he found it difficult to improve after spending so much time. However, if other alchemists knew that he was complaining like this, they would definitely be so angry that their mouths would twist. You only used a few 100,000 years at most, and you actually dared to complain? Then how would the majority of alchemists endure this? 9 years later, Ling Han and the others exited the Black Tower. Celestials naturally could not have any changes in their appearance, and Shirley and Shiryu had very obviously grown into the appearance of teenagers. They did not use time acceleration, or they would have long since become adults. Ling Han did not want them to miss out on their childhood, or at least advance into 20 years under the normal flow of time. Only 9 years had passed in the outside world, so there naturally could not be any changes in Alchemy City, and those former holy sons and holy daughters also kept a very low profile. With Grandmaster Zicheng watching over, who would dare act recklessly? Ling Han prepared to set out, but before he could set out, he was called over by Grandmaster Zicheng. "Come, let me introduce you. This is your junior nephew," Grandmaster Zicheng said with a smile, pointing at a middle-aged man in front of him. He pointed at a middle-aged man in front of him and said, "Peng Huanyan, 3rd's disciple. He's already a 3-star alchemist." Chapter 1940. Ling Han's expression darkened, and he said, "Peng Huanyan, for 3rd senior brother's sake, I will not argue with you, but you should also know your own limits, and do not make things difficult for yourself." Peng Huanyan laughed coldly. "Ling Han, do you think that you are qualified to ride on my head just because you have become Grandmaster Zicheng's disciple? I have tolerated you for a long time, but you are just a brat. What are you pretending for? He was jealous of Ling Han. What aspect did the latter have that was superior to him, yet could become alchemist Zicheng's disciple, and even become his legacy disciple? Furthermore, this brat had 4 beauties by his side, all of them exceptionally beautiful, each with their own unique characteristics. In terms of martial art strength, he was in the dividing soul tier, and in terms of alchemy, he was a 3-star alchemist, which aspect was inferior to Ling Han. He was not convinced. On what basis? Ling Han, Niu wants to beat him up. Niu was the first to be unable to hold back and was about to step forward to fight, and the Empress's expression was also cold. She similarly could not stand others being rude to Ling Han, making her feel the same way. Peng Huanyan was not the slightest bit afraid. These people were only severing mundane tier, and he was a young soul elite. Could it be that they were all heaven-defying freaks on the level of 5th severance that could battle him? Wasn't that a joke? Grandmaster? At this moment, a young man walked out quickly from the city, dressed in crimson embroidered clothing, extremely ostentatious. His looks were not bad, his figure slender, and he was a very handsome man. When it was this young man, the guards hurriedly saluted. This young man was not simple. Not only was he Peng Huanyan's grand disciple, he was also the young master of the city's noble Missouri clan, a figure that could make the earth tremble with a stamp of his feet. His name was Mo Shuang. Mo Shuang. Peng Huanyan nodded with a smile, seeming to value this grand disciple very much. This was natural. The Mo clan was an ascending origin tier force, the strongest below Celestial King tier, and he was only a 3-star alchemist. In front of the Mo clan he could only be said to have some status, and was not qualified to put on airs. Alchemists indeed had a transcendent status, but this status was given by cultivators. In front of the Mo clan, what difference was there between an alchemist and a passerby? For example, the Mo family was someone that Peng Huanyan needed to curry favor with. Although Mo Shuang appeared respectful on the surface, there was a trace of arrogance in his eyes. Although he had become Grandmaster Zhu Feng's disciple, his true strength lay in his martial art. As for alchemy, that was just for fun. Moreover, Guanhua City had this kind of atmosphere. Geniuses of martial art would all try to get involved with alchemy to add a little more glory to their reputation. Grandmaster, this person is... He looked at Ling Han, his voice filled with 30% doubt and 70% disdain. Oh, this is just a minor character who came to congratulate your ancestral master for breaking through to the 6th refinement. Peng Huanyan said faintly. With outsiders present, it was absolutely impossible for him to address Ling Han as martial uncle. Taiyan heavens, he added. Taiyan sky. The sneer on Mo Shuang's face became even more pronounced. Who didn't know that the Taiyan heaven was the weakest among the 33 heavens of the Eastern Celestial Realm? In the past, there had still been the Wide Prosperity Heaven and the Far South Heaven, but in the last few 100 million years, the martial art of the Wide Prosperity Heaven and the Far South Heaven had developed by leaps and bounds, and had already left the Taiyan heaven far behind. In the hearts of the cultivators of the Wide Prosperity Heaven, the Taiyan heaven was synonymous with weaklings. Thus, if everyone's cultivation level was the same, then it was naturally the cultivators of the Wide Prosperity Heaven who could easily win. However, while the Taiyan heaven was weak, it seemed to abound in exquisite beauties. He looked at Niu, then at the Empress, and then at bewitching Maiden Ro. He felt that the 3 women each had their own strengths. One was beautiful and pure, one did not show her features, but was exceptionally beautiful, and the last was incredibly charming, each and every one of her movements causing one's heart to itch. Grandmaster, it seems like this person is slightly disrespectful towards you, Mo Shuang said. He was secretly delighted. This was a rare opportunity to act up. If he humiliated Ling Han in public, what would these beauties think? The Taiyan heaven was really weak. 3 exquisite beauties were actually following such a good-for-nothing. Peng Huanyan calmly said, "He is merely a young man who does not know the immensity of heaven and earth." In front of this junior, he naturally had to maintain the reserved demeanor of a high-grade alchemist. However, firstly, he was indeed respecting his own status, and secondly, Ling Han was Grandmaster Zi Cheng's disciple and was his uncle. If he personally made a move against Ling Han, Grandmaster Zhu Feng would definitely not spare him. But Emo Shuang was different. Firstly, he was not guilty of ignorance, and secondly, the Emo clan was also a great force. How could it be that Zhu Feng would turn hostile against the Emo clan? Thus, if Emo Shuang gave Ling Han a beating, then Ling Han was destined to have no choice but to swallow this loss in silence. When Emo Shuang heard this, he immediately made a decision. Peng Huanyan disliked Ling Han very much, but because of his own status, it was not appropriate for him to make a move. Thus, he only spoke disdainfully, yet was subtly encouraging him to make a move. That was exactly what he wanted. "Brat, quickly kneel and apologize to my grandmaster." Emo Shuang pointed a finger at Ling Han, his tone filled with a commanding tone. He really looked down on the people of the Taiyan heaven. He had heard that there were only 2 or 3 monarch tiers, unlike their wide prosperity heaven. Just this Guanhua city alone had such a supreme monarch tier. Lu Jie, a prodigy among men. Ling Han waved his hand, indicating that the Empress and the others should not be agitated. Leave this matter to him. He looked at Emo Shuang smilingly and said, "Brat, has no one ever taught you not to be used as a tool by others? Brat, do you think that you are my senior?" Emo Shuang was instantly seething with anger. Ling Han's vitality and flame of life all showed that the latter was younger than him, and by a lot, but this guy actually dared to call him brat? What a cheap mouth. I'll teach you a lesson first. Emo Shuang brazenly moved. His strength was really extraordinary. As a young master of an ascending origin tier clan, it was enough to squeeze into the ranks of emperor tiers. Ling Han nodded internally. No wonder it was said that the wide prosperity heaven had received the blessing of the heaven and earth. Any random severing mundane tier they encountered was an emperor tier, which showed how high the level of martial art in the entire wide prosperity heaven was. However, what was a mere 4th severance in front of him? Ling Han clasped his hands behind his back, and his feet moved casually, easily dodging Emo Shuang's attack. On the basis that they were from the same sect, and he was also his senior, Ling Han decided that he would not make it too difficult for the other to lose. Moreover, Emo Shuang was young and rash, and was only being used by Peng Huanyan as a tool. Emo Shuang consecutively launched over a dozen moves, but did not even touch a corner of Ling Han's clothes. His face involuntarily flushed red, his eyes burning with endless fury. He felt that he could suppress Ling Han with a single move and embarrass him. Then, he would be able to determine who was superior with the Empress and the other beauties. But after these few moves, his efforts were all in vain. Conversely, Ling Han's figure was graceful, and he was incredibly calm. With this comparison, it was clear that Ling Han had the upper hand. He felt that his face had lost all face, and then a blazing fury rose up. Brother Emo, you've met your match." There was a long laugh, and a group of 7 people walked in from outside the city. There were 5 men and 2 women, and they were all dragons and phoenixes among men. The men were handsome and bold, while the women were as dainty and beautiful as flowers. The one who spoke was a man, and he carried a large purple bow on his back. He was slightly taller than he was, and he walked with a majestic gait, exuding an awe-inspiring heroic spirit. Chapter 1941. Emo Shuang immediately stopped and retreated a few steps, pulling away from Ling Han. Only then did he turn towards the 7 people, showing an annoyed expression, and said, "Han Tao, you don't have to be nosy." He was speaking to the young man with the large bow on his back. Han Tao laughed loudly, and his eyes swept over Ling Han's group. Immediately, a stunned expression appeared on his face. The beauty of the Empress, Hu Niu, and bewitching Maiden Ro should all be unparalleled, yet 3 of them had appeared at the same time. Though the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was slightly inferior, she could still be considered a supreme beauty. Even in Guanhua City, not many could compare. Didn't you, 7th young Master Emo, claim to be extraordinary and think that you are the strongest prodigy below Holy Sun Lu? How come you haven't even touched a corner of his clothes after fighting for so long? A young man in green said with a smile, the ridicule at the corner of his lips very obvious. His name was Lu Haoming, and he could be said to be Mo Shuang's nemesis, because the two of them were both pursuing the same woman. It was the young girl in red among the seven, who was called Fairy Du, and her name was Du Shuyun. With such a great opportunity in front of him, there was naturally no reason for him to miss it. Lu Haoming, do you want to die? Mo Shuang was in a fit of anger, and hearing Lu Haoming's sarcasm and mockery, he couldn't help but be even more displeased. Oh, if your heaven-pecking technique has not been cultivated to the 7th level, you are not qualified to be my opponent at all. Lu Haoming said proudly. Mo Shuang's eyes trembled. Your great evolution technique has been cultivated to a heaven-shocking level? Hee. Lu Haoming appeared even more arrogant. In reality, he had finally advanced the great evolution technique to a heaven-shocking level a few days ago, but directly challenging Mo Shuang would seem too deliberate. This was the best opportunity. He could ruthlessly slap Mo Shuang's face in front of Du Shuyun. Mo Shuang wanted to say some harsh words, but he and Lu Haoming had fought for so long, and the two of them could be said to know each other inside out. Only by cultivating the heaven-pecking technique to the 7th level could he match the other's heaven-shocking level. If he stubbornly insisted on fighting the other, he was destined to be utterly humiliated, which was far more embarrassing than not accepting the battle. Lu Haoming gained the upper hand and couldn't help laughing heartily. He said to Ling Han, "Old Mo, let me help you deal with this opponent." This was a further humiliation. What you can't handle, I can. Naturally, you are inferior to me. Ling Han was in the middle of acting. Suddenly, he saw the fire burning on his head. He was going to change from an audience member to a leading role, which made him a little surprised. He didn't say anything, did he? Husband is indeed a troublesome person. No matter what he does, he'll always attract hatred. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden nodded with certainty. Ling Han beat them up. Hun Yo shouted excitedly. Ling Han rubbed his chin and said, "What did I do to you? Did I accidentally spill the beans about you going to the brothel or that you like men?" In this way, a fight was inevitable. He couldn't be bothered to persuade the other party to stop, lest he asked for trouble. What could he do if he was asking for a beating? Han Tao and the others instantly laughed loudly. The two girls covered their mouths, seeming to be embarrassed, but it was clear from their eyes that this level of joke was completely unable to make them feel embarrassed. Meanwhile, Lu Haoming was furious. He looked darkly at Ling Han and said, "At first, I only wanted to play with you, but you just had to have a dirty mouth. If I don't give you a beating, you won't learn to be obedient." Ling Han shook his head and said, "I don't want to play with you, you pervert who likes men." Lu Haoming's hands trembled in anger. How could this person's mouth be so poisonous? You just had to ask for trouble. He moved. Hong, a long rainbow surged out from his body, turning into a massive sickle that slashed towards Ling Han. There were 7 patterns of great Tao flickering on the blade, all incredibly profound. Mo Shuang's expression instantly became grave. 7 patterns of great Tao, this was the sign that the great development technique had been cultivated to a heaven-shocking level. Though those 7 patterns were not complete, the quantity was there. This could be ranked as top-notch even among 4th Severance Emperor tiers, and any higher than that could only be crushed by Monarch tiers. He definitely had to work hard, or he would really be trampled underfoot by Lu Haoming. Ling Han stretched out a finger and tapped out at Lu Haoming. Against Mo Shuang, he modestly gave face to 3rd senior brother. After all, he was a senior. But against Lu Haoming, there was no need. He could directly make a move. Wang, with a tap of his finger, a frightening aura instantly pressed down like the heavens. Everything disappeared, and only that finger of Ling Han's sliced through the air to attack. It was clearly right in front of his eyes, yet there was a heavy feeling that it had passed through time itself. In this finger, Ling Han had fused a sliver of the regulations of time. It was not the tide of the ages, but rather something that he had comprehended from the Black Tower. Lu Haoming's expression instantly changed drastically. Though they had not actually clashed yet, he had a feeling that he would not be able to withstand this finger. How could this be? The other party was only a 4th Severance. He felt an incredible tightness in his chest, and a mouthful of blood spurted out. When they saw this scene, everyone was so shocked that their scalps went numb. It should be known that Ling Han's attack had not even reached him, and it was merely his aura, yet Lu Haoming was already unable to withstand it. The gap in strength was too great. How was this a fourth severance against a fourth severance? It was clearly a dividing soul tier against a severing mundane tier. Lu Haoming sat down on the ground and could only watch helplessly as this finger approached. Endless sweat poured out of his whole body, instantly drenching his clothes. However, this finger stopped right before Lu Haoming's forehead and was just a sliver away from touching. Fifth severance. Mo Shuang and the others mouthed these two words silently, their faces filled with shock. Even in the wide prosperity heaven, the number of fifth severance monarch tiers was pitifully few. They were really the top prodigies of the celestial realm, and could cause countless king tiers and emperor tiers to die of envy. Ling Han smiled calmly and asked, "Is it fun?" Lu Haoming was completely speechless. He was already dumbfounded from shock. After a long time, he recovered slightly and couldn't help but be filled with hatred towards Ling Han. Wasn't that so? You were so strong and could have easily defeated Mo Shuang, so why did you act as if you were about the same level as the other, causing him to underestimate his opponent and make a move, and the result was that he had made a fool of himself? A person like him would definitely not reflect on his actions. It was clearly him who had taken the initiative to provoke and attack Ling Han, but he actually thought that it was Ling Han who was deliberately showing weakness and baiting him into making a move. This was really a case of the guilty complaining first. Mo Shuang was also stunned. He naturally knew Lu Haoming's strength like the back of his hand. The latter was actually not a match for Ling Han, so it was definitely the same for him. But just then Ling Han had actually let him have so many moves. Now, he was really giving him too much face. Humans were like this. Before knowing Ling Han's strength, Mo Shuang thought that Ling Han could be easily bullied, but now that he knew how strong Ling Han was, he instead felt grateful towards Ling Han. Who exactly was this person? After his arrogance faded, Mo Shuang immediately recovered the intelligence that a prodigy should have. Though Peng Huanyan was very disdainful towards Ling Han, when he thought about it carefully, he should have come here to accompany Ling Han. To be able to have a 3-star alchemist personally accompany him, what did this mean? Ling Han was definitely not, as Peng Huanyan had said so lightly, that he was only a nameless nobody in the calm peace heaven. On the contrary, he definitely had a great background. He instantly understood. He had been used by Peng Huanyan as a tool. It was not convenient for Peng Huanyan to make a move against Ling Han, so he had pushed him out, almost causing him to suffer a crushing defeat and make a fool of himself. As he thought about it, he was filled with gratitude towards Ling Han, but resentment towards Peng Huanyan arose. "Brother Ling, what exactly is your background?" he asked. Chapter 1942. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "Didn't I say that I'm your senior?" These words made Mo Shuang very displeased, thinking that he had already adjusted his attitude well enough. "So why were you still playing tricks and taking advantage of him?" "I didn't say wrong, did I, martial nephew Peng?" Ling Han said with a smile, his eyes fixed on Peng Huanyan. What? Everyone looked at Peng Huanyan in shock. Though the strength of the dividing soul tier was not taken too seriously by these young emperor tiers, after all, they would soon advance to this level. What they cared about was naturally his identity as a 3-star alchemist. Alchemists were extraordinary, and a 3-star alchemist could barely be counted as an ascending origin tier. Thus, Peng Huanyan was naturally very awesome. If not for that, why would Zhu Feng send him to invite Grandmaster Zicheng? But now, Ling Han actually referred to Peng Huanyan as martial nephew. Martial nephew. This definitely could not be in terms of seniority in martial art, because Peng Huanyan was an alchemist, and martial art was only his secondary cultivation. He would not deliberately take a master teacher as a disciple, and thus gain himself a ridiculously young martial uncle. Alchemy. Everyone knew that Peng Huanyan's master was Zhu Feng's, and if Peng Huanyan really was Ling Han's martial nephew, then Ling Han was in the same generation as Zhu Feng. Was this possible? All of a sudden, everyone's eyes focused on Peng Huanyan, wanting to know how he would answer. Peng Huanyan couldn't help but feel incredibly awkward, a blush appearing on his aged face. Did he dare to lie in public? If Zhu Feng knew, he would definitely beat him to death. You don't even want to acknowledge your ancestor? He could be vague about Ling Han's identity, but if Ling Han really asked him in public, what could he do? Denying was impossible, but deliberately changing the topic, who could not see through this kind of attempt to cover up? There was no helping it. Peng Huanyan gritted his teeth and said, "Junior uncle is right." Peng. Everyone felt their minds shake. Ling Han really was Peng Huanyan's martial uncle. This news was too shocking. When they looked at Ling Han again, they suddenly felt that Ling Han didn't have a trace of arrogance left. Someone who could address a 4-star alchemist as a brother would definitely be incredibly arrogant. No, Ling Han's attitude just then was practically extremely humble. One had to know that it was Mo Shuang and Lu Haoming who provoked him first. Mo Shuang was both grateful and angry. His gratitude was naturally directed at Ling Han. This was his great-granduncle, and he was not angered even under his provocation. In fact, Ling Han was a 5th Severance Monarch tier, and could completely defeat him with a single strike. Even if the Mo clan severely injured him, the Mo clan would not be able to do anything about it. After all, who asked the Mo clan's junior to be so rude to Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother? Strictly speaking, the Mo clan's junior brother deserved to be beaten to death. Since he was grateful to Ling Han, the rest was naturally anger towards Peng Huanyan. Old man, you clearly know Ling Han's identity, yet you still push him into the fire pit. Lu Haoming's heart also tightened. He knew that he had kicked a metal plate, but if he wanted to write off his grudge with Ling Han just like that, he could not do it no matter what. It was fine if he could not defeat Ling Han. There were plenty of such people in Guanhua City, and he only needed to say a few words to stir up trouble. No one could humiliate him like this. Great-granduncle, let me take you for a stroll in the city, Mo Shuang immediately said, not even looking at Peng Huanyan. In any case, his identity in alchemy was just for show, and he definitely could not focus on alchemy in the future. Moreover, he might not be able to advance into a 1-star alchemist in this lifetime, so what need was there for him to waste this time? Thus, he was respectful towards Peng Huanyan only because the latter was a 3-star alchemist, and not because he really wanted to learn anything from the latter. Being tricked by Peng Huanyan like this, he was naturally angry. Ling Han glanced at Peng Huanyan, dispelling the thought of beating the latter up, and said, "All right, then I'll have to trouble you, the host." "Don't worry, I will definitely satisfy great-granduncle," Mo Shuang said smilingly. It could be seen that he was deliberately currying favor with Ling Han. This was not because he was grateful to Ling Han, but because Ling Han was Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother. This relationship was too shocking. If the ancestor of the Mo clan was here, he would definitely approve of him forming a friendship with Ling Han. Ling Han nodded and said, "No need to call me great-granduncle, just call me by my name." He could tell that the other was not a true alchemist. In truth, Mo Shuang did not want to call Ling Han by such a frightening title, so he was naturally overjoyed when he heard this and said, "Then I'll call you Brother Ling, all right." "Brother Ling, will also accompany you for a stroll," Han Tao and the others said one after another. They were not idiots. Didn't they know that Ling Han's rare goods were worth hoarding? How could they possibly let Mo Shuang take advantage of him alone? The group surrounded Ling Han and left, leaving behind only Peng Huanyan and Lu Haoming. Both of their expressions were as dark as if they were about to drip water. Humph! Peng Huanyan flicked his sleeves and left, his fists that were hidden in his sleeves clenched tightly. He was furious to the extreme. A mere lowly person from the calm peace heaven actually dared to make things difficult for him. He definitely would not spare Ling Han just like that. Just wait and see. This is Guanhua City. You, a person without any foundation coming here, is destined to be toyed around by him. The celebration was still half a month away, and he had plenty of time to toy with Ling Han until he was crippled. Seeing Peng Huanyan leave, Lu Haoming also set off, heading in a different direction. He naturally could not spare Ling Han. There was no need to seek help from others. The Lu clan had plenty of dividing soul tier elites. Even if you were a 5th Severance and a Monarch tier, You could only match Yang Sol at most. If he invited a Yin Sol elite, how could it be that he would not be able to suppress you? Just wait and see. Accompanied by Mo Shuang and the others, Ling Han began to stroll around Guanhua City. Different from Alchemy City, Guanhua City only had a single level, but it was incredibly large. To say nothing of 10 days or half a month, even 100 or 1,000 years might not be enough to take a rough stroll around the whole city. This was equivalent to a super large planet. Its territory was extraordinarily large, and the population was in the hundreds of billions. Thus, Ling Han and the others could only take a cursory look. Thankfully, there were naturally teleportation formations in the city. As long as one could afford star stones, one could roam freely. After a day of strolling, Ling Han stayed in the Mo clan under Mo Shuang's earnest invitation. He naturally enjoyed the most luxurious guest room. Not only were there star stones piled up as he wished, there was also a time cultivation chamber that could accelerate time by 100 times. The Mo clan only opened this kind of guest room to the most precious guests, such as the heirs of celestial kings and ascending origin tier elites, and Ling Han could also enjoy this kind of treatment, which showed how important the Mo clan was to him. He stayed like this for a day, and Mo Shuang suddenly ran over, saying, Brother Ling, what is it?" Ling Han was currently sipping tea with the Empress and the others. Life was not just about cultivation. When it was time to relax, one should relax. There is a gathering tonight, hosted by Holy Sun Lu. How about it? Are you interested in going? Mo Shuang asked with some excitement. Lu Jia, the Holy Son of the Universal Clouds sect, the true disciple of the Universal Clouds celestial king. He had long since advanced into the fifth severance, and was destined to become a celestial king. Though the Universal Clouds sect still had 13 other holy sons and holy daughters, they all paled in comparison to Lu Jia. No one thought that there was any other holy son or holy daughter that could compete with Lu Jia for the position of future sect leader. Chapter 1944. Ah, what a joke. Don't think that you can call yourself an alchemist just because you've touched an alchemy furnace. Yen Wei swept a disdainful look over Ling Han. In the future, don't call yourself an alchemist in front of me. Mo Shuang flared up in fury. You're the joke. Don't you know that Ling Han is Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother? Even if Ling Han really didn't know alchemy just based on this, he had the right to be called an alchemist. You're the fucking joke, he retorted. Yen Wei also showed an angry expression. He had achieved success in his youth, and there had always been people who flattered and fawned over him. When had he ever been pointed at and scolded? You're not even a one-star alchemist, and you dare call yourself an alchemist? Isn't that a joke? Yen Wei scoffed. Alchemists had special badges, and one could tell what star they were at a glance. When Ling Han was still in Alchemy City, because of his relationship with Grandmaster Zicheng, he always wore it on his chest, but when he left Alchemy City, he naturally took it off. Thus, back then, Peng Huanyan could tell that Ling Han was a two-star alchemist at a glance, and now Yen Wei looked down on Ling Han extremely. Alchemists were a group like cultivators, with a strict hierarchy. Furthermore, because there were fewer alchemists, it was more difficult to climb up. Thus, a difference of 1 star was a completely different concept, and the difference in status was too great. Mo Shuang wanted to retort, but he really didn't know what level Ling Han was at, and didn't know where to start. He could only say, even if my big brother Ling concocted pills with one hand, he'd still be several hundred times better than trash like you. Brother Mo, there's no point in saying that, Yang Jia interrupted. The other was just pestering endlessly. If you have the ability, let's compete. I'm not afraid of you. Mo Shuang naturally wouldn't show weakness. Competing in sword technique, saber technique, archery, tea ceremony, or chess, I'll accompany you all. These competitions have been done too many times, there's no point. Yang Jia shook his head, paused, and then said, let's compete in alchemy. Brother Yen will face you, big brother Ling. He purposely emphasized the words brother Ling, his sarcasm obvious. Ling Han rubbed his nose. Was he really that hateful? Why did he become a target when he had only accompanied a person to a banquet without even saying a word? Could it be that not only did he have a halo of trouble, but it was also contagious? What's the point of letting others compete? If we want to compete, we'll compete ourselves. Mo Shuang didn't have the slightest confidence in Ling Han. Although he was the junior apprentice brother of a 4-star alchemist, he didn't even have an alchemist badge on him. If Ling Han had advanced to the level of an alchemist, why didn't he wear the alchemist badge? Wasn't that a symbol of status? Brother Mo, are you afraid? Yang Jia provoked. I heard that you have a small cup of Earth Spirit Heavenly Spring Water, and you're planning to use it to forge an immortal weapon. It just so happens that I have a piece of 4-star pseudo-divine metal. Let Brother Yen compete with your brother Ling. If you win, I'll give you this piece of 4-star pseudo-immortal metal so that you can forge an immortal armament. But if you lose, you'll hand over the Earth Spirit Heavenly Spring Water to me. Mo Shuang couldn't help but fly into a rage. You're too fucking evil. How could a mere piece of 4-star pseudo-divine metal compare to the Earth Spirit Heavenly Spring Water? If it was added during the forging of a celestial armament, it could increase the celestial armament star level by about half a level. Moreover, it could even reach the level of 7-star pseudo-divine metal. How could it be used to forge a 4-star pseudo-celestial tool? That would be too much of a waste. Even if Yang Jia really won, there was no way that he would use the Earth Spirit Heavenly Spring Water on that piece of pseudo-divine metal. Instead, he would save it for later. Someone had given him a gift. A thought flashed through Ling Han's mind, and he purposefully put on an expression of pleasant surprise. Old 7th, 4-star pseudo-divine metal? His shocked expression made it seem as if he wasn't talking about 4-star pseudo-divine metal, but real divine metal. Did you have to go so far? Although 4-star pseudo-divine metal was priceless, it wasn't unattainable among ascending origin tier forces. At most, it was slightly more valuable. Did you need to do that? Yang Jia and Yen Wei both wore expressions of disdain. This person was truly a country bumpkin. They didn't know how he had managed to become friends with Mo Shuang. Meanwhile, Mo Shuang's heart stirred. He naturally wouldn't think that Ling Han's worldview and level would be so low. He was a monarch tier and the junior brother of a 4-star alchemist, so how could it be that he hadn't seen much of the world? He wasn't stupid, and he immediately realized that Ling Han wanted to screw over Yang Jia and Yen Wei. He naturally wouldn't object to this. In fact, he was even willing to cooperate. He hurriedly said, "Big brother Ling, 4-star pseudo-divine metal can't compare to Earth Spirit Heavenly Spring Water at all. The difference in value is too great, and this kind of bet is completely not worth it. Do you have no confidence in me?" Ling Han pretended to be humiliated, appearing to be very angry. "No, big brother Ling, listen to me." Mo Shuang was very cooperative, appearing to be very anxious. Yang Jia hurriedly interrupted and said, "Old 7th Mo, even your big brother Ling is so confident, so why don't you let him try?" "Big brother Yang, do you have the face to say this?" Mo Shuang humphed. "How can a mere 4-star pseudo-divine metal compare to Earth Spirit Heavenly Spring Water?" "Fine, then I'll add in the leaf of a celestial medicine," Yang Jia said proudly. Yang Jia said proudly, "The divine green phoenix grass has a medicinal age of 9 billion years and contains fire law fragments." Mo Shuang couldn't help but be tempted. No matter what kind of celestial medicine it was a precious treasure. Even if he didn't cultivate this kind of regulations, he could definitely use it to exchange. Moreover, 9 billion years was long enough. Generally speaking, only Celestial King tier forces could grow 5 elements celestial medicines. Things like void flowers and lightning grass, because the conditions for their growth were too harsh, were extremely difficult to grow even for Celestial Kings. They could only be nurtured by nature, so their value was naturally even higher. I'll bet. Ling Han made the final decision. Yang Jia was afraid that Mo Shuang would go back on his word, and immediately made the decision. Mo Shuang couldn't help but look worried. Ling Han had indeed taken the bait, but the problem was that he didn't know how strong Ling Han was in alchemy. What if he was tricked? But Ling Han had actually agreed, so how could he go back on his word? He'd just accept it. At most, he'd just sacrifice a portion of the Earth Spirit Empty Spring to strengthen his relationship with Ling Han. Wait, Yen Wei said. Ling Han couldn't help but look towards this person. Could it be that this person had suddenly become intelligent and seen through his trick? I'll add another bottle of soul consolidating pill, Yen Wei said. He retrieved a bottle of alchemical pills and a stone table, placing the bottle of alchemical pills on the stone table. Do you dare or not? So he was raising the stakes. Ling Han's heart relaxed. This soul consolidating pill was used by dividing soul tier cultivators. At this cultivation level, the emphasis was on cultivating the divine sense that had been separated, so the soul consolidating pill could be of help. It was the most commonly used alchemical pill for dividing soul tier cultivators, but its value was indeed considerable. There were no cheap celestial pills, because they all required a tiny bit of celestial medicine. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Ling Han pretended to be a fool. Meanwhile, Emo Shuang pretended to persuade, but he couldn't dissuade Ling Han. In the end, he could only raise the stakes, adding 10 bottles of Azure Frost pills. These were used by severing mundane tiers, and because there was a difference of 1 cultivation level, the amount was also increased by 10 times. Then let's begin, Yen Wei said proudly. In his opinion, he only had to stretch out a hand, and Ling Han would know to retreat and admit defeat. Come, let's go to the time cultivation chamber. The 4 of them set out at the same time, and there was naturally a large crowd following them. It would be a waste not to join in on this kind of liveliness. Chapter 1945. Of course, the saints' residence had time cultivation rooms, and there were 3 types of them. The first one was for the servants in the saints' residence to use for cultivation. The effect was the weakest, but such a benefit was still quite good. After all, it was free. If one were to go outside, the cost of a day's training would be staggering. The second one was 100 times faster, and it was provided to the guests of the Saint Prince's manor. Of course, it was also free. The third type had a speed boost of 200 times. This was a special room for the Holy Sun, and there was only one of it. Apart from Lu Jia, only those who had received special permission from him could use it. Therefore, Ling Han and the others naturally couldn't go to the cultivation room that was 200 times faster. Instead, they chose the cultivation room that was 100 times faster. As long as one was able to enter the residence of the Holy Sun, they would be able to use it for free. Furthermore, there were many of them. Otherwise, the 2 of them would have to squeeze into a single room. Ling Han and Yen Wei entered the cultivation room, each took out a pill furnace, and began to prepare. They turned off the shielding array formation from the inside so that the people outside could clearly see what was going on inside. However, it was only limited to their vision. Sound and smell could not be transmitted out. Since it was a competition, they naturally had to maintain fairness. Otherwise, if you directly took out a high-tier celestial pill from your spatial god tool, how would that count? Hearing that there was an alchemy bet, more and more people came to watch. I opened a gambling house. No matter who I bet on, the payout will be 2-1, Emo Shuang suddenly shouted. This was what Ling Han had told him before entering the training room. If he wanted to make a profit, he would make a huge profit. Many people were still unclear of the situation. After asking around, they all placed their bets on Yen Wei. It's a sure win. Old Emo must have been kicked in the head by a donkey. How could he still believe that Ling Han would win? It was impossible no matter how he thought about it. Yang Jia's heart trembled slightly. In the beginning, Emo Shuang had refused, but now, he had actually taken the initiative to initiate a bet. Was this because he was confident? However, judging from the odds, Emo Shuang was not biased towards anyone, so Yang Jia was not sure. But no matter what, this battle was already inevitable. On the stone table, there were spatial divine tools placed one after another. Most of them were star stones, but there were also a few people who took out precious pseudo-divine metal. These people wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to make a killing. As more and more things piled up on the stone table, Emo Shuang began to wipe his cold sweat. That was because the majority of the bets were on Ling Han losing, and if Ling Han really lost, he would have to pay a huge loss. However, if he won, then the rewards would be incomparably shocking. What's all this commotion about? Han Tao strode over. After hearing the details of what had happened, he couldn't help but have a strange expression on his face. He was well aware of Ling Han's background, at least a little. However, wasn't the junior brother of a 4-star alchemist awesome enough? This Yen Wei's courage was truly astonishing. He actually dared to compete with Ling Han in alchemy. Wasn't he just looking for trouble? Haha, I want to play too. He laughed. How could he miss such a good opportunity to make money? The bet is sealed. The bet is sealed. Mo Shuang hastily cried out, not waiting for Han Tao to say how much he wanted to bet. Old Mo Chi, that's not very kind of you. Han Tao laughed. If you eat the meat, you should let me have some soup, right? Hearing this, the surrounding people were all puzzled. From Han Tao's tone, it seemed as if Ling Han would definitely win. Where did you get your confidence from? Brother Han, what do you mean? Someone asked. Han Tao chuckled and said, nothing much. I just think that Brother Ling will definitely win, he said perfunctorily. Who would believe that? Everyone shook their heads. An impatient person said, Brother Han, could it be that this Ling Han is also a 3-star alchemist? I'm not sure. Han Tao shook his head. I indeed don't know what star alchemist Brother Ling is. In fact, I'm not even sure if he's an alchemist. Then where did you get your confidence from? Han Tao revealed an unfathomable smile. When he saw that everyone's gazes were focused on him, he opened his mouth and said, however, I do know a little information that I can share with everyone. Alchemist Peng Huanyan, everyone knows him, right? Of course they knew. Peng Huanyan was Grandmaster Zhu Feng's favorite disciple and could possibly become a 4-star alchemist in the future. But why did he suddenly bring Peng Huanyan into the picture? Could it be that Ling Han is Peng Huanyan's disciple? Someone exclaimed in surprise, thinking that he had figured it out. For example, Mo Shuang, Yang Jia, and even Han Tao had all taken an alchemist as their master and learned alchemy. In name, they were all Grandmaster Zhu Feng's disciples, but they were all just playing around. Thus, it was naturally impossible for Peng Huanyan to take them as disciples. Instead, he sent a 1-star alchemist to teach them. The relationship between them was not strictly master-disciple, so even if they became enemies in the future, no one would accuse them of betraying their master. Of course, even if it was not that serious, it was best not to become enemies if they could avoid it. After all, it would damage their reputation. However, if Peng Huanyan personally took him as a disciple, the significance would be completely different. It would prove that Ling Han was indeed talented in alchemy. That's impossible. If he's Alchemist Peng's disciple, how could we not have heard of him? Someone questioned. Peng Huanyan had always been following Grandmaster Zhu Feng in Guanhua City in pursuit of alchemy. Thus, if he wanted to take a disciple, it would definitely be in Guanhua City. Even though Guanhua City was huge, Peng Huanyan could still be considered an important figure. How could no one know that he had taken in a few disciples? Perhaps alchemist Peng found a good seedling when he was out adventuring, someone else said. This seemed to make some sense. Brother Han, you should continue. The impatient couldn't be bothered to guess, and directly asked for the answer. Han Tao smiled faintly and said to Mo Shuang, let Han 7th reveal the answer. Obviously, even if he didn't say it, Han Tao would. Mo Shuang could only say, Peng Huanyan is Brother Han's martial nephew. Pooh! Instantly, almost half of the crowd spluttered, and the remaining half were also tongue-tied, their eyes wide open. Everyone's first reaction was naturally shock. This was too shocking. Then, everyone's second reaction was that Mo Shuang was bullshitting. Did you fucking get kicked in the head by a donkey? Why don't you say that Ling Han is Grandmaster Zhu Feng's martial uncle? Isn't that even more impressive? You call this bragging? Fuck, you're bragging to the heavens. Haha. Yang Jia was the first to laugh loudly. Brother Mo, I was really almost fooled by you. Only now do I realize how rich your imagination is. I have a whole new level of respect for you. Although he said he had a whole new level of respect for him, there was a strong disdain on his face. Obviously, this new level of respect could be good, but it could also be bad. Mo Shuang didn't get angry. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes and heard it with his own ears, he wouldn't have believed that a youngster like Ling Han was actually Peng Huanyan's martial uncle. But he was just that awesome. Young Master Mo, I want you to take back what you just said and apologize to my master, a young man said angrily. His eyes were about to spit fire. His name was Gui Deshui, and he was Peng Huanyan's disciple. Thus, when he heard that Mo Shuang actually dared to defame his master, he was naturally furious. In terms of background, he couldn't compare to Mo Shuang at all. Thus, even though Mo Shuang should have called him martial uncle, he didn't dare to put on airs. After all, he was only a small one-star alchemist. Chapter 1946. Why should I apologize? Mo Shuang asked calmly. Putting aside the fact that he was speaking the truth, even if he really was spouting nonsense, it wasn't something that a mere one-star alchemist could criticize. He was an emperor tier. You insulted my master. Gui Deshui shouted, appearing to be incredibly angry. How? Mo Shuang's smile vanished, and his expression became very stern. He was extremely displeased with Peng Huanyan. What grandmaster? He had actually pushed him into a pit of fire. He really had no morals. He had only been playing around with alchemy, and now that he was displeased with Peng Huanyan, he naturally had even less interest in alchemy. Gui Deshui was so angry that his face turned red, and his chest rose and fell continuously. Wasn't this insulting? You've already called my master a little tramp's apprentice nephew. Is there anything more insulting than that? You not only insulted my master, but you also insulted Grandmaster Zhu Feng, he shouted, his eyes spitting fire, transforming into 2-foot-long strips of flame. Alchemists definitely cultivated the regulations of fire, and everyone was an expert at playing with fire. Hearing this, everyone nodded. If this accusation was really put on Mo Shuang's head, then Brother Mo would definitely lose a layer of skin. Wasn't that right? Peng Huanyan's uncle? Wasn't that Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother? What a huge joke. How could such a youngster be Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother? Even if you wanted to brag, you had to brag about something reliable. Get lost. I can't be bothered to waste words with a nobody like you, Mo Shuang said coldly. He was an emperor tier, and he naturally disdained to bully this kind of weakling. If news of him beating up an alchemist spread, it would be embarrassing. Almost no one would put alchemists and cultivators in the same category. The so-called alchemists were trash with only a cultivation level, but their battle prowess was only 5. Gui Deshui pointed at Mo Shuang, his hand trembling. He turned around angrily. He definitely couldn't defeat Mo Shuang, but there was no lack of 2-star alchemists and dividing soul tier elites under Peng Huanyan. If he could invite such people, he would at least not be at a disadvantage when fighting with Mo Shuang. Mo Shuang was certain in his heart. To say nothing of the senior disciples of Peng Huanyan, even if Peng Huanyan personally came, so what? When he saw Ling Han, he could only obediently call him martial uncle. Brother Mo, you've gone too far this time, Yang Jia sneered. He didn't have the slightest bit of sympathy for the other party. He could not wait for the other party to fall as hard as possible. It's hard to say who will play who. Mo Shuang calmly spoke. He was definitely going to win this bet. And if Peng Huanyan really came over, he would definitely beat him up. This old bastard actually dared to scam him? By his sister. Hurry, those two have already started concocting pills. Someone suddenly said. This attracted everyone's attention, and they stared at the 2 cultivation rooms. However, amateurs could only watch the show. They were all at a loss. They felt that both Ling Han and Yen Wei's techniques were dazzling, but they couldn't tell which one had the advantage. It was fine for them to fight, but alchemy was a completely different field. Zhu Zijuan is here. Someone suddenly exclaimed. After that, he shouted into the distance, Young Master Zhu, come here for a moment. After a short while, a tall and long-legged young man walked over. There was a faint smile on his face, and he appeared to be brimming with confidence. Zhu Zijuan was Grandmaster Zhu Feng's grandson. He was astonishingly talented in alchemy, and he was also a dual cultivator of martial arts and alchemy. Thus, even though he was young, he possessed a very high reputation in Guanhua City. Young Master Zhu, everyone greeted him. What's wrong? Zhu Zijuan asked. He was slightly puzzled. Why had they called him over? Those two are currently competing in alchemy. Young Master Zhu, come and comment, someone said. Zhu Zijuan frowned slightly. He was an alchemy prodigy. Even though he was only a 2-star alchemist, he had already reached the 3rd refinement in spirit refinement. Even Grandmaster Zhu Feng had only been as talented as him in the past. They actually wanted him to comment? Who was worthy? However, there were many king tiers and even emperor tiers here, so he didn't want to offend them. Thus, he reluctantly said, those two are both refining a 2-star alchemical pill. They're about to succeed. Refining a celestial pill would normally take a month. It was said that refining a celestial pill would take thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of years. However, refining a celestial pill would only take around 6 hours if time was sped up by 100 times. Almost 4 hours had already passed, so the process was naturally more than halfway. 2-star alchemical pill? When these 4 words entered their ears, everyone was slightly startled. It wasn't strange that Yan Wei could refine a 2-star alchemical pill. After all, he was a 2-star alchemist, so it would be strange if he couldn't refine a 2-star alchemical pill. However, they were astonished that Ling Han could also refine a 2-star alchemical pill. Not only was he an alchemist, but he was also a 2-star alchemist. An expression of disdain appeared on Zhu Zijuan's face when he saw the expressions on everyone's faces. They were truly a bunch of amateurs. He continued, there's nothing impressive about being a 2-star alchemist. What determines how high an alchemist can ultimately reach is actually spirit refinement. After pill refinement, spirit refinement is the most important. Everyone nodded in agreement. They indeed didn't have much of a say in alchemy. Zhu Zijuan was the true authority here. That's right, young Master Zhu. May I ask if Grandmaster Zhu has a junior brother? Someone asked. Many people instantly pricked up their ears upon hearing this. Everyone was truly curious about Ling Han's background. The title of Peng Huanyan's martial uncle was slightly frightening. Zhu Zijuan frowned again. Was there something wrong with these people? As far as I know, there isn't. He shook his head and gave a negative answer. Sure enough, there wasn't. Everyone nodded in agreement. In fact, this was more like what they knew. How could Grandmaster Zhu Feng possibly have such a young junior brother? Mo Shuang was going to be in trouble this time. Yang Jia's heart also calmed down. He had truly been slightly flustered after learning that Ling Han was a 2-star alchemist. As for now. Meanwhile, Mo Shuang and Han Tao were also slightly dumbfounded. What was going on? Peng Huanyan had personally admitted that Ling Han was his martial uncle. Thus, he naturally had to be Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother. Would a lofty 3-star alchemist make such a joke? Impossible. However, why was Zhu Zijuan denying it? No matter how they thought about it, they couldn't figure out the reason behind this. What kind of misunderstanding was there? What kind of twist was there? In any case, they could only wait and see. In the time cultivation chamber, Ling Han and Yan Wei had both finished refining their alchemical pills and entered the stage of spirit refinement. At this moment, there was a commotion behind them. Guidesui had already returned, and he had brought 2 middle-aged men with him. Both of them wore graceful expressions, and one of them was clearly someone who had held a high position for a long time. Who dares to pretend to be my master's martial uncle? One of the middle-aged men asked in a stern tone. Even his eyebrows were raised, and his anger was evident on his face. His name was Ran Fei, and he was Peng Huanyan's second disciple. The other middle-aged man was Shi Yong, and he was Peng Huanyan's third disciple. Although they were both 2-star alchemists, they had both reached second refinement in spirit refinement. This was extremely impressive. Young Master Zhu? Ran Fei and Shi Yong both faltered when they saw Zhu Zijuan. They were all of the same generation, and they were even senior brothers. However, Zhu Zijuan was Grandmaster Zhu Feng's grandson, so they naturally couldn't compare to him. Chapter 1948. He purposefully coughed and placed the alchemical pill back into the vial. However, during this process, he had already substituted an ordinary celestial pill for the real one. Meanwhile, the true alchemical pill had entered his spatial god tool. Humph, it's merely a one-star alchemical pill. It hasn't even undergone spirit refinement. What a joke, he said in disdain. With a wave of his hand, he tossed the vial back to Ling Han. Ling Han caught the vial, and a cold smile appeared on his face. Did he think that Ran Zifeng hadn't noticed Ran Zifeng's little trick? Trying to trick me? Ling Han pointed at Ran Fei and said, "Don't play tricks like that. Return my alchemical pill." What alchemical pill? Ran Fei glared at Ling Han and said, "Not only did you pretend to be a senior of my sect, but you even slandered my reputation. I'm a 2-star alchemist. You're nothing in front of me." Everyone was confused. One was saying that Ran Zifeng had swapped his alchemical pill, while the other was denying it. Who was lying? Pretending to be my ancestor's junior brother? How dare you? Zhu Zijuan strode over to Ling Han, his eyes filled with fury. Zhu Feng was the pride of the Zhu clan, and he was their anchor. He definitely wouldn't allow anyone to slander him. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "Obediently hand over my alchemical pill, and we'll settle our matters one by one. Let's settle the bet first, and then we'll settle the issue of my identity." How dare you? You're still trying to stall for time, Zhu Zijuan said coldly. Hurry up and kneel. On one side was a completely insignificant stranger, and on the other side was Grandmaster Zhu Feng's grandson. Who would the crowd believe? Of course it would be Zhu Zijuan. Thus, everyone shook their heads. They felt that Ling Han was truly an idiot. It was fine if he pretended to be Grandmaster Zhu's junior brother elsewhere, but he just had to come here, and he was even caught red-handed by Grandmaster Zhu's disciples. Capture him and hand him over to Grandmaster Zhu for punishment. How can a nobody like him have the right to see Grandmaster Zhu? Just execute him. No matter what, capture him first. Many people started to clamor. Naturally, they were those who had bet on Ling Han's victory. If they captured him, they would naturally win the bet. Mo Shuang flew into a rage and said, "Are you still being reasonable? Right now, we are competing in alchemy ability. What nonsense are you spouting? This kind of person has an evil heart. What right does he have to call himself an alchemist?" Zhu Zijuan had already arrived in front of Ling Han, and he thrust out a palm. Boom! A boundless aura swept out, transforming into numerous symbols of the Great Tao. Zhu Zijuan, 4th Severance Peak Stage King Tier. In Guanhua City, which was filled with prodigies, Zhu Zijuan still wasn't qualified to be called a supreme prodigy. However, a king tier at the peak stage of the 4th Severance definitely couldn't be considered weak. What kind of ability could a tramp with a mouth full of nonsense have? Naturally, he could be taken down in one strike. I wonder if Mo Shuang and Han Tao's intelligence has been eaten by dogs. They actually believe that this young man is Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother. Ling Han casually made a grabbing motion. But Zhu Zijuan's wrist was caught in his hand. What? Everyone's expressions tensed up upon seeing this. Ling Han had casually blocked the attack of a 4th Severance King tier. No matter what, he had to be an Emperor tier. For the sake of 3rd Senior Brother, I won't lower myself to your level. Ling Han waved his hand, and Zhu Zijuan was sent flying. Zhu Zijuan straightened his back, an expression of astonishment on his face. If Ling Han had wanted to harm him just then, he would definitely have been insta-killed. However, he didn't feel the slightest bit of gratitude. Instead, he felt even more humiliated. Did he need to be grateful to Ling Han? He was Grandmaster Zhu Feng's grandson, so who would dare to harm even a single hair on his head? Moreover, since Ling Han was an Emperor tier, why would he pretend to be Zhu Feng's junior brother? This was far too despicable. You're just here to humiliate me. Who will capture this villain for me? He said hatefully. He looked around and saw that everyone was wearing a reserved expression. No one dared to answer him. Everyone present was either a king tier or an emperor tier. None of them would easily lose face like this. A bottle of mundane mending pills. Zhu Zijuan retrieved a bottle of alchemical pills and flashed them in his hand. I'll gift this bottle of mundane mending pills to whoever captures this villain for me. Hearing this, countless people revealed a look of interest. Mundane mending pills could mend the imperfections on one's path to the severing mundane tier. Of course, they couldn't allow king tiers to advance to the emperor tier. However, they could allow low-level king tiers to become high-level king tiers, and low-level emperor tiers to become high-level emperor tiers. They were extremely rare and precious. Young Master Zhu. Ran Fei and Shi Yong hurriedly called out. This was a pill that Grandmaster Zhu Feng had specially refined for his beloved grandson, and it had a spirit refinement of 5 times. Its value was far above that of an ordinary mundane mending pill. Using the word priceless to describe it was the most appropriate thing to do. Why did he need to ask the people present to help him? The two of them were Sun Soul tier elites, so how could they not be able to deal with a measly severing mundane tier? However, they didn't know that Zhu Zijuan viewed himself as a cultivator. How could the mighty Zhu clan need to mobilize someone at a higher cultivation level to suppress a mere brat? That would be far too humiliating. Thus, Zhu Zijuan was willing to sacrifice a bottle of mundane mending pills to capture Ling Han without any hesitation. In any case, wouldn't it be easy for him to obtain mundane mending pills? He could simply ask Grandmaster Zhu Feng to refine some more. I'll do it, an Emperor Tier said as he leaped out. As the saying went, there would definitely be courageous people with great rewards. Mo Shuang couldn't help but shake his head. Han Tao also did the same. Only they knew that Ling Han wasn't just the junior brother of a 4-star grandmaster. Moreover, he was also a monarch tier in the field of martial art. To be honest, the latter was even more dazzling. After all, monarch tiers could definitely become celestial kings. However, 4-star grandmasters could only barely rival a first heaven celestial king at most. The gap between them was definitely not small. Under normal circumstances, an emperor tier would be unable to withstand a single blow from a monarch tier, let alone a 5th severance against a 4th severance. Ling Han had the advantage of a minor level. An expression of displeasure spread across Ling Han's face, and he said, "All of you like to pester others endlessly, isn't that good? Then I'll beat all of you until you're satisfied. In front of me, Hudong, there's no place for you to be impudent." The emperor tier that leaped out scoffed. He stretched out a hand, and boom, the sky was filled with symbols of great Tao. He was really very strong, and he was probably already a top-notch emperor tier. His hand could cover the sky, and he grabbed out at Ling Han. Ling Han flicked out a finger. Pooh! A sharp murderous sword chi soared into the sky. This was the comprehension that he had extracted from the regulations of slaughter. After fusing it into his sword technique, its destructive power was even more astonishing. It could slice the heavens and it could shatter the universe. Pooh! The large hand was immediately sliced into 2. A terrifying murderous aura surged, soaring into the sky. Hudong's expression changed drastically. Before he could even cry out in shock, his whole body had already been sent flying. A streak of blood shot out, and peng, he landed heavily on the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. What? Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. A mighty emperor tier actually couldn't withstand a single blow? How could he possibly be so strong? Could it be that he was a monarch tier? Impossible, right? If he was a monarch tier, why would he need to pretend to be Grandmaster Zhu Feng's junior brother? Though this title was indeed very astonishing, it wasn't that much stronger than a monarch tier. Could it be that he wasn't a monarch tier, and had merely walked even further on the path of monarch tiers? Chapter 1949. However, Hudong had already been defeated, so who else would dare to challenge Ling Han? "Young Master Zhu, let me do it," Ran Fei said as he stepped forward. It was clear that a 4th Severance Emperor tier could only fight to a draw with Ling Han at most. If they wanted to suppress him, the only severing mundane tier cultivator was probably Holy Sun Lu. Of course, Fairy Lu Han could do it as well, but how could they possibly order around these two great deities? Zhu Xiaojun pondered for a moment before nodding slowly. Ran Fei immediately took a step forward after receiving Zhu Xiaojun's approval. Boom! An aura that was unique to dividing soul tier cultivators suddenly erupted from his body. Even if an alchemist could only defeat trash at the same cultivation level, he was still indescribably powerful when he had the suppression of an entire major tier. In front of a fourth severance, even an emperor tier cultivator would be an insurmountable mountain. The king tiers in the surroundings all wore expressions of disdain. This was a gathering of prodigies, yet Ran Fei couldn't defeat them, so he actually brought out his senior. Naturally, they would look down on him. In martial art, strength was revered. This strength didn't just refer to one's cultivation level, but also to one's invincibility in battles against peers of the same cultivation level. Ling Han had also completely lost his patience, and he said coldly, "Come, I need to discipline you guys in place of third senior brother. You still dare to speak nonsense?" Ran Fei sneered as he charged forward. This was a dividing soul tier elite. Even if he was a fake, he was still a dividing soul tier elite, and he could easily crush any severing mundane tier emperor tier cultivator. Even the king tiers who were looking down on him wore expressions of discomfort. The suppression of an entire major tier was unbearable to them, and they had no choice but to retreat repeatedly to avoid the brunt of this attack. The emperor tiers fared slightly better, but they weren't much better either. They also retreated one after another. There were 5 levels of the celestial tier, and each level was an insurmountable mountain. Ling Han was done for. Boom. The massive hand pressed down, crushing toward him. But Ling Han casually slapped Ran Fei across the face. He clearly hadn't used any regulations, and his movements didn't seem to be fast either. Thus, everyone could clearly see what had happened. However, it was as if Ran Fei had been bewitched. He could only watch as Ling Han's slap landed on his face. There was a crisp sound of a slap, and Ran Fei was sent flying into the air. However, he hadn't even been sent flying when Ling Han grabbed his calf and forcefully dragged him back to the ground. Of all the things you could learn, you just had to learn how to steal. Is this how third senior brother taught you? Ling Han slapped Ran Fei's face again, and said, "You have to be respectful toward your elders. Pa, even if I'm not your senior, we're both alchemists. Shouldn't we support and help each other? Pa, you don't know right from wrong, and you're just criticizing me. Who do you think you are? Pa, if it weren't for the fact that my strength isn't bad, should I be bullied by you?" Ling Han slapped Ran Fei as he spoke. Every slap was extremely powerful, and Ran Fei's face instantly swelled up. It was rare for him to look like a pig's head. Papa. The crisp sounds of slaps rang out incessantly, causing everyone to be dumbfounded. A dividing soul tier elite couldn't retaliate at all, and could only allow Ling Han to slap him. Just how great was the difference in strength? 5th Severance Monarch tier. At this time, who would still doubt Ling Han's strength? Only a Monarch tier could resist a major tier, and still have the strength to battle. Guess. He really was a Monarch tier. Hee, is everyone having fun? There was a long laugh, and a young man strode over. Behind him was a woman as beautiful as a celestial fairy. The two of them were clearly walking casually, yet they exuded a domineering aura that made everyone around them move out of the way. Holy Sun Lu! Many people's voices trembled, and they showed absolute respect. This was a super prodigy that others could only look up to. The words, 5th Severance Monarch tier, were enough to show how powerful he was. The person beside him was Lu Han, his biological younger sister. Both brother and sister were geniuses of martial art, and they had both become Monarch tiers. This was rare even in the history of the celestial realm. It was unknown how much the heavens had favored them to allow both brother and sister to be so outstanding. "Friend, can you stop for now?" Lu Jie said to Ling Han. Although he said it, his tone was commanding. This was natural. He was a Monarch tier, and his words were followed by 10,000 laws. How could he allow others to question him? Ling Han glanced at Lu Jie, displeasure spreading across his face. If the other party had spoken politely, then he wouldn't be an unreasonable person. However, Lu Jie had immediately issued a direct order, and this instantly caused Ling Han to feel disgusted. He first slapped Ran Fei, then turned around and said, I'm teaching a junior a lesson, and I don't need you to interfere. Fuck, how dare this guy? Seeing that Ling Han actually dared to oppose Lu Jie, everyone was stunned. Even if Ling Han had already proven that he was a monarch tier, no one was willing to help him. That was because monarch tiers were also divided into strong and weak ones. Lu Jie ranked around 20th among the severing mundane tier monarch tiers in the wide prosperity heaven. Although he was almost at the bottom, if Ling Han had stronger battle prowess, wouldn't he have long since become famous? Ling Han. Lu Jie didn't fly into a rage. Even in the wide prosperity heaven, there were only over 20 monarch tiers in the severing mundane tier, and each of them could become a celestial king in the future. They were the foundation of the wide prosperity heaven. He had learned of Ling Han's name from the discussions of others, and he softly muttered it. However, he was sure that he had definitely never heard of this name. I never knew that Grandmaster Zhu Feng had a disciple like you, he said. This was inconceivable. An alchemist could actually produce a monarch tier? Who would believe this? Let him go first, Lu Han interrupted, her voice filled with intense displeasure. Lu Jie had already said to let him go, yet Ling Han still continued to act as he pleased. This was far too arrogant. No matter what, this was still Lu Jie's holy sun residence. If he made a move here, what would happen to Lu Jie? I'm just teaching my own junior a lesson. There's no need for you to worry, Ling Han said. Lu Jie asked around, and soon learned of the cause and effect of this matter. He was clearly very surprised. A monarch tier actually pretended to be an alchemist? This was something that he couldn't understand. However, if he said that Zhu Zijuan and the others were lying, that would be even more of a joke. Would they dare to deny such an important matter in public? Wouldn't that make them unfilial descendants? He pondered for a moment before saying, let's deal with these matters one by one. Isn't this alchemy gambling? Let's continue. As long as one knew Ling Han's skill in alchemy, they would be able to tell whether he was lying or not. Ling Han cracked a smile and said, that's the way to deal with this matter. Then why aren't you letting him go? Lu Han asked from the side. Because of her first impression of Ling Han, her impression of him was extremely poor. Ling Han chuckled and said, my alchemical pill was swapped out by him. How can I not take it back? You're spouting nonsense. Ran Fei hurriedly shouted. If he was accused of this crime in front of everyone, he might even be expelled by Zhu Fengkai. That would be too immoral. Is it up to you to decide whether or not I'm spouting nonsense? Ling Han retorted coldly. He was extremely disappointed in this junior's character. Are you the one who decides whether or not I'm spouting nonsense? Lu Han asked coldly. She had already tolerated Ling Han for a very long time. It's up to me to decide. Ling Han finally found a spatial divine tool on Ran Fei's body. He took out an alchemical pill from within. He was naturally the clearest about whether or not this pill had been refined by him. Reading on a phone is more refreshing. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.